She had 18 months. 18 months to run, to hide, to convince herself she'd made the right choice. Then her son stopped breathing, and the only person in the world who could save him was the man she'd spent every single day running from. Nikolas Theron, Greek shipping magnate, underworld king. The father her son had never met. She'd left in the dark, pregnant and terrified, swearing she would never go back. Now she was dialing his number with shaking hands, watching her baby boy go still in her arms. If you want to see how far love can survive betrayal secrets and the Greek underworld stay until the end, hit like and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The apartment was too quiet. That was what finally broke Mara Calloway. Not the fever, not the labored breathing, not even the way Theo's small body had gone limp against her chest like something vital had simply switched off. It was the quiet. After 3 hours of screaming high and inconsolable and tearing through the thin walls of the Glyphata rental in waves that brought a neighbor knocking twice, her son had gone silent. And in 18 months of motherhood, Mara had learned that silence from Theo was never peace. Silence from Theo was something to be afraid of. She pressed her palm flat against his sternum, willing herself to feel the rise and fall she'd been tracking obsessively since the thermometer read 104.1. His skin was furnace hot under the damp washcloth she'd draped across his tiny ribs. His eyes were half open, glassy, tracking nothing. Theo. She said his name out loud, which she hadn't meant to do, naming. The fear made it real. Theo, baby, stay with me. In the emergency room, where she'd worked before all of this, before the running and the hiding and the reinvention, she'd been known for her composure. Colleagues called it cold. Mara preferred precise. She could count respirations through the noise of a trauma bay-assess work of breathing, with a glance, recognize the particular quality of distress that meant a patient was about to cross from stable to critical without ever once letting her face betray the knowledge. She was good at that, at keeping the interior separate from the exterior, at being a wall between the chaos and the patient who needed calm. That wall was gone now. She tilted his head back. Airway clear, pulse thready but present. Breathing shallow, irregular, the kind of pattern she'd learned to read as the body beginning to falter. Not a seizure. Not yet. But the fever was 105.3 now, and it had been climbing for hours, and the clinic she'd called twice tonight had said to bring him in if things got worse, come back. If the ibuprofen didn't hold, monitor him and don't panic. Things had gotten worse. The ibuprofen hadn't held, and Mara didn't have a car. She sat on the edge of the couch in the cramped living room of the apartment she'd been renting for the past 11 months, the one she'd found through a cash transaction arranged by a woman who asked no questions in a suburb that was unremarkable enough that no one would think to look for her here. She'd been careful. She'd been so careful, different name at the clinic, cash only at the pharmacy hospital. Work arranged under the table through a private medical service that paid less than a third of what she was worth and didn't require a background check. She'd built herself a life so deliberately invisible that it barely existed at all. And now that invisibility was going to kill her son, she looked at her phone, set it down, looked at it again. There were resources. There were always resources. She could call an ambulance, but an ambulance meant paperwork, and paperwork meant her real name surfacing in a database somewhere, and databases meant being found. She had 50 euros in cash. Taxis in this part of Athens ran 30 at minimum to the nearest hospital, and she'd have to wait for one, and she didn't have time to wait. She looked at Theo. His chest barely moved. The washcloth had gone warm and ineffective. His fingers, normally curled into purposeful fists even in sleep, lay open and slack against her thigh. There was one option she hadn't let herself consider. One number she'd saved in her phone 18 months ago in a moment of weakness, buried under a contact name that meant nothing. A single letter E for emergency, and never dialed. She told herself it was a failsafe. She told herself she'd never be desperate enough to use it. She picked up the phone. She stared at the contact for a long time. Long enough that the clock on the wall moved and Theo made a sound that wasn't quite breathing right, a soft rattling exhale that made every nursing instinct she had scream at once. She pressed call. The line rang once, twice. On the third ring, a voice answered. Deep, unhurried, edged with the kind of quiet authority that had nothing to prove. Speak! Mara's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't heard that voice in a year and a half. She'd spent considerable energy making sure she would never hear it again. It landed now like a physical thing, a weight in the chest, a loosening of something she'd held clenched for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like not to. "Nikolas?" She said his name before she could think better of it. Silence. Then quieter something running beneath the word that she couldn't quite name, Mara. Not a question. Recognition. "I need your help." Her voice came out steadier than she expected, old training kicking in. Another pause. She could feel him thinking that particular quality of stillness that preceded Nikolas Theron's decisions, the way the gears of his mind engaged before he spoke. She'd once found it mesmerizing. She'd also once found it terrifying. Both things had been true simultaneously, which was part of the problem. "Where are you?" "It doesn't matter." "It does." His tone sharpened, not angry, not yet, but close and moving in that direction. "Where are you, Mara?" She looked down at Theo, at the way his head had lolled against her shoulder, at the blue-tinged pallor beneath the fever flush on his lips. She thought about hanging up, thought about calling the ambulance, after all, taking her chances with the paperwork gambling that by the time anyone connected her name to anything, she'd have moved again, started over again, rebuilt the invisible life again. Then Theo exhaled that rattling sound again and the gamble stopped mattering. "Glyphata," she said. "Apartment 3C, building on Poseidonus Street near the waterfront. Green door. 20 minutes. No hesitation, no negotiation. Don't move. Don't call anyone else. Nikolas." "Mara." His voice dropped. Still quiet. But the quiet had teeth in it. "If you disappear before I get there, I will take this city apart until I find you. Do you understand me?" She understood him. The line went dead. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand, her heart doing something complicated in her chest, and then she pressed the back of her hand to Theo's forehead and began counting respirations. Nikolas Theron did not panic. Panic was a luxury he had never been able to afford. The empire his father had built, the Theron Group, 40 years of shipping routes and harbor contracts, and the kind of relationships between legitimate enterprise and necessary darkness that kept commerce moving through Greek ports, demanded a particular variety of stillness at its center. Nikolas had been that stillness since he was 26 years old, and his father's heart had given out in the middle of a negotiation, leaving him alone in a room full of men who were waiting to see whether the sun would break. He had not broken. He ended Mara's call and stood motionless in his study for exactly 4 seconds, which was 3 more than he usually allowed himself for processing the unexpected. Then he moved. Dax was at the door within 30 seconds. His security chief's particular brand of silent readiness already in place. The kind of preparedness that communicated he had been waiting without having been obvious about waiting. "Cars," Nikolas said. "Full team. Now." Dax didn't ask questions. He never did. That was why Nikolas had kept him for 11 years. While the convoy assembled, Nikolas stood at the window of his study and looked out over the harbor. It was late. The Aegean was a dark mirror below him, the lights of container ships moving across it in slow arcs, each one representing money and leverage, and the particular weight of responsibility that came from owning things. He owned the waterfront practically. He owned the shipping lanes in a less official but no less real sense. He owned politicians and harbor master appointments, and the silence of men who could have spoken and chosen not to. He had not been able to find Mara Calloway. 18 months of looking. Not frantic. He was never frantic, but thorough, systematic. The kind of search that left no stone unexamined. He'd had people comb through employment records, rental histories, medical registrations. He'd had feelers out in 6 cities. She had vanished as completely as if she had never existed, and the only explanation that made any sense was that she had been very, very good at disappearing. She had learned that from him. He should be furious. He was furious. It was there beneath the surface of everything else, cold and contained and waiting. But beneath the fury was something he was less willing to examine, relief so acute it had almost knocked him sideways when he recognized her voice. She'd called because she needed something. She hadn't called because she'd missed him. Hadn't called because she wanted to come back. Hadn't called because the 18 months of silence had grown unbearable the way they had for him. She'd called because she needed something, and he was the last option. He knew all of this. He was still moving faster than he had moved in months. The Glyphata apartment building was nothing. That was the word that kept occurring to Nikolas as he climbed the narrow stairwell. Nothing. Peeling paint the color of old bruises. A hallway that smelled of damp and fried oil and years of people living carefully within their means. A flickering light on the second-floor landing. It was the kind of building that asked no questions and offered no answers, the kind that absorbed its residents into anonymity, which was exactly why she had chosen it, and exactly why it made his jaw tighten in a way he hadn't anticipated. He told Dax to stay with the convoy. He knocked on the door of apartment 3C and it opened immediately. And then he forgot everything else. Mara stood in the doorway. Dark hair loose and tangled, the kind of undone that came from hours of not caring about anything except the thing in her arms. She was thinner than he remembered, and he'd spent enough time over the past 18 months not thinking about her that the shock of seeing her face was considerable. She looked exhausted in the specific way of people who have been running on adrenaline past the point where adrenaline is useful. But it wasn't Mara that stopped him. It was the child. The boy was perhaps 18 months old. Dark curls, olive skin. His head rested against Mara's shoulder with the limpness of a body conserving everything for the basic business of staying alive. His breathing was audible from 2 feet away, shallow, effortful, wrong. Nikolas's gaze moved from the boy to Mara. Back to the boy. He was a practical man. He dealt in facts and numbers and the simple arithmetic of cause and effect. He had known when she called that something was very wrong. He had not anticipated, had not allowed himself to anticipate the particular shape of very wrong that was standing in front of him. The boy's face, the angle of his jaw, the dark eyes half open and fever bright that tracked toward Nikolas with a drowsy lack of focus before closing again. Nikolas, Mara's voice broke on the 2 syllables. Please, he needs a doctor right now. Nikolas's hands had curled into fists without his awareness. He forced them open. Get in the car, he said. She didn't argue. She grabbed a bag from beside the door, prepared, he noticed. She'd had it ready before he arrived and followed him down the stairs with the boy pressed to her chest. Dax met them at the building entrance, his expression giving nothing away, as he registered the scene and opened the SUV door without comment. Nikolas climbed in after Mara. The convoy pulled out. Call Dr. Velas, he said. His voice was level. He'd worked to make it level. Pediatrics set up at the house within 15 minutes. Full kit. Dax made the call. Nikolas sat back, his gaze fixed on the boy in Mara's arms. What's his name? Mara's arms tightened. Theo. Theo. He said it quietly, weighing it. Then, how old is he? Her breath hitched. Mara. He kept his voice very even. How old is he? The city moved past outside. 18 months of silence pressed against the walls of the car. 18 months, she said. Nikolas leaned forward slowly, his elbows on his knees, his eyes on hers. In the ambient light of the city through the SUV windows, he watched the truth move across her face, the guilt, the fear, the exhausted resignation of a woman who had known this moment was coming and had simply run out of road. And you were going to tell me when, he said exactly. She didn't answer. When? Harder this time. Not a question. Her voice broke. Tears spilled. She didn't wipe them, her arms full of the boy. I didn't know how. You didn't know how. He repeated it back to her. The flatness of it filled the car. You didn't know how to call me and say, Nikolas, you have a son. It wasn't safe. She met his eyes. Hers were wrecked but steady. You were in the middle of a war with the Vranas faction. People were dying. You were coming home covered in blood and making decisions. I couldn't bring a child into that. I couldn't. So you made that decision for both of us. I was protecting him. From me. The words were quiet and precise. You were protecting him from me. She didn't deny it. He had to respect that even through the cold fury that was doing something structural to the inside of his chest. She could have softened it. She hadn't. Theo made a small sound. Nikolas's gaze dropped to the boy, automatically. The anger momentarily eclipsed by something he hadn't expected, the specific urgent pull of concern for a person he had known existed for approximately 6 minutes. His son. He sat back, looked out the window, breathed through the arithmetic of it. 18 months. First words. First steps. An entire calendar of firsts that had happened without him in rooms he had never seen with a woman who had decided on his behalf that he was too dangerous to know. When we get to the house, he said finally, Dr. Velas is going to look after him. And then you're going to tell me everything, every decision you made, every reason you thought justified it. He paused. And then we're going to figure out what happens next. She nodded, not looking at him. He turned back to his window. The Theron estate appeared ahead, its gates lit against the dark. And for the first time in his life, Nikolas found himself grateful for the walls he'd built. Not for himself, but for the small boy breathing too shallowly in the seat across from him. The estate's guest wing had been set up by the time they arrived. Nikolas didn't ask how. His staff had been running this household for years. They knew how to read urgency. A crib had been installed in the corner of the largest bedroom. Fresh linens, temperature-controlled, a soft lamp already lit. Mara saw the crib and stopped walking. "I made a call," Nikolas said. "Lay him down." Dr. Velis was 70 years old, gray-haired, and had been the Theron family physician since Nikolas was a child. He had the patient manner of a man who had seen everything and chose by philosophical conviction to take nothing personally. He set his bag on the bed, looked at Mara, and said, "Talk to me. Symptoms and timeline." She shifted into her nursing register without missing a beat. Fever spiking to 105 over a 6-hour period, lethargy beginning 2 hours in decreased responsiveness. In the last 40 minutes, no rash, no vomiting, no exposure history. She could account for. Her voice was precise and professional and betrayed nothing. And Nikolas found himself watching her with a kind of sideways attention as Velis examined the boy, watching the way she held herself together, watching the effort it cost her, watching the things she was carefully not letting show. She was extraordinary even now. He had always known that. It had been the central inconvenience of his life for 2 years. "Viral infection," Velis said eventually. "Significant but not unusual for the age. The fever is the problem. It needs to come down and his fluid levels are poor. I want to start an IV." He glanced at Nikolas. "If there's no improvement in the next 2 to 3 hours, we discuss transfer to a hospital." "We handle it here." Velis looked at him. Mara looked at him. "We handle it here," Nikolas repeated. "Whatever you need." Velis nodded once with the equanimity of a man who had received stranger instructions and set about placing the IV with the gentle efficiency of long practice. Theo whimpered, but didn't fight it, too exhausted, too depleted, the small body marshaling its resources. Mara stood beside the crib through all of it, one hand resting lightly on the rails, and Nikolas stood in the doorway and watched and said nothing. When Velis finished, he looked at Mara directly. "You did the right thing," he said. "Getting him here when you did." She nodded. Her face did something complicated. He left. The door clicked shut. Mara sat down in the chair beside the crib, as if her legs had decided the question without consulting her, folding over her own knees and pressing the heels of her palms against her eyes. Her shoulders shook silent, controlled, the kind of crying that had learned to be invisible. "Mara." She looked up. "You should rest." "I'm not leaving him." "I didn't ask you to leave him. I said rest." He crossed to the sitting room that adjoined the bedroom and returned with a blanket-heavy wool, one of the ones his housekeeper kept folded in the linen chest. He set it around her shoulders without quite touching her. "You can't function on this level of exhaustion. You know that." She took the blanket without a word, wrapped it around herself. Then she looked at him and said, "Thank you." He pulled the other chair to the opposite side of the crib and sat down. They watched Theo breathe. The IV pump hummed its small rhythm. Outside, the estate was quiet. "Tell me," Nikolas said. She let out a slow breath. "I was 3 months along when I left. I didn't know. I found out after at a clinic in Thessaloniki." "Why didn't you call me then?" "Because by then I'd already decided." She looked at Theo, not at him. "I'd watched you for 8 months. I knew what your life was. I knew what the Vrana's situation was building toward. I'd cleaned blood off your shirt more times than I could count and listened to conversations I wasn't supposed to hear, and I knew Nikolas. I knew what it would mean to raise a child in that world. So you decided for him." "I decided for both of us, for all 3 of us." Her voice was rough. "I thought it was the only way to keep him safe." "And was it?" Flat. Not quite a question. She looked at Theo, the IV in his tiny arm, the fever flush still in his cheeks. "No," she said. "No, it wasn't." Silence. "You have no idea," Nikolas said, "what it was like to wake up and find you gone." She didn't speak. "I searched for you for months. I had people I trusted working every angle I had access to. I considered the possibility that something had happened to you, that I had gotten you killed just by having you near me. I sat with that." His voice remained even. That was the most he would give her of what those months had been like. "You vanished as if you had never existed. I had to. You chose to." He leaned forward. "There is a difference." She met his eyes then fully, and what was in her face was the same thing that was in his, all of it. The anger and the grief, and the exhaustion of people who had been carrying the same weight from opposite sides of an enormous distance. He looked at her for a long moment. Then Theo shifted in the crib, a small sound restless. Both of them moved toward the crib at the same instant, stopping when they realized it. Nikolas sat back. He studied his son's face, the shape of it, the set of the jaw, the way the dark lashes lay against the fever-flushed cheek. "He's mine," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "Then he stays." He looked at Mara. "And so do you." She opened her mouth. He held up a hand. "Not tonight. We'll discuss what that means tomorrow when he's stable and you've slept. But I want that understood clearly. You don't leave this house without having that conversation first." A pause. "I am not negotiating that point." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Okay." It was not agreement exactly. It was the recognition of a person who had run out of alternatives. He knew the difference. He was willing tonight to accept the one in place of the other. "Sleep," he said. "I'll stay with him." "You don't have to." "Mara." He looked at her steadily. "I've missed 18 months of my son's life. I don't have to do anything. I want to." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she leaned back in the chair, pulling the blanket tighter, and within minutes her breathing had evened into the deep rhythm of pure exhaustion. Nikolas sat in the chair across from her and watched his son sleep. He had built an empire on control, on the ability to anticipate threats, neutralize them, stay 3 moves ahead of everyone in the room. He had survived by treating emotion as a liability connection, as a vulnerability attachment, as the specific kind of weakness that got people killed. He had lived by this philosophy for so long it had become indistinguishable from his actual self. In the silence of this room, with the IV pump, and the soft breathing, and the woman asleep in the chair across from him, he sat with the fact of Theo, 18 months old, dark-haired his, and felt something shift at the base of everything he'd built. It didn't break. Men like Nikolas didn't break cleanly, but it moved. The fever broke at 4 in the morning. Nikolas tracked the drop in temperature the way he tracked everything, methodically checking the thermometer every 30 minutes the way Velis had instructed, noting the gradual descent from 105 to 103 to 101.4 as the medication worked and the fluids did their job. By the time the window went gray with early light, Theo's color had returned and his breathing had steadied into something that felt sustainable. Mara slept through most of it. He let her. At just past 6, he heard movement from her chair, a sharp intake of breath, the instant reorientation of someone whose sleep had been watchful even in its depths. "He's better," Nikolas said before she could panic. "Fever's down to 100. Velis checked him at 5 and said he's out of the woods." She was at the crib before he finished speaking. One hand on Theo's forehead, her nursing assessment running automatically before she even seemed to know she was doing it. He watched her work through it, chest rise, color responsiveness, and watched her shoulders drop as the numbers came back reassuring. Then Theo's eyes opened. For a moment he blinked confused, adjusting to the unfamiliar ceiling. Then he found Mara and his face crumpled into relief. "Mama." He reached for her. She had him out of the crib in one motion, holding him against her chest with a fierceness that was everything she hadn't been able to show in front of him last night. "Hey baby, I'm here. Mama's here." Theo buried his face in her shoulder, his small hands fisted in her shirt. Then he turned his head. He found Nikolas across the room, looked at him. The look of an 18-month-old encountering a new face openly without defenses, with the complete unself-consciousness of a person who has not yet learned to be strategic about attention. Nikolas didn't move. Wasn't sure he could. The boy stared at him. Then slowly, without any precedent or explanation, he smiled. Something happened in Nikolas Theron's chest that he was not prepared for and could not have named. He stood and crossed to the crib, slowly giving Theo time to track the movement to decide. He stopped a foot away. "Hey," he said. Quiet. A word he never used this way, gentle and stripped of everything else. Theo reached for him. It was a reflex, an 18-month-old's instinctive grab, but it landed on Nikolas's hand like a decision. Those small fingers curled around his index finger and held on with a grip that was stronger than he'd expected. And Nikolas stood there with his son's hand in his, and understood with the sudden clarity of a man who has just been rearranged that every choice he made from this point forward would be organized around this. Mara was watching him. He could feel it. He didn't look at her, not yet. He wasn't ready for her to see what was on his face. "Your son is asking to be picked up," she said softly. He reached for Theo. But 3 days passed in a strange suspension. Theo recovered with the speed of early childhood, the illness departing as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind nothing but a healthy appetite and the same inexhaustible energy that, according to Mara, was his standard condition. He transformed the estate. Nikolas had not understood until now how deeply a building could be altered by the presence of a 2-foot-tall person with no understanding of quiet. Theo's laughter bounced off the marble floors, his demands cut through board calls. His emphatic opinions about which books required repeated readings restructured Nikolas's evenings in ways no corporate negotiation had ever managed. Nikolas restructured around him without discussion. Moved meetings, shortened calls, spent evenings on the sitting room floor building things from blocks that Theo invariably knocked over with a delighted scream. He was aware in some parallel part of his mind that this was not sustainable, that the world outside the estate had not paused, that Elias Vranas, the man who had spent the better part of a decade probing the edges of Theron territory, looking for the precise vulnerability that would give him an opening, had not paused. He was aware that Mara's presence here was not yet resolved, that she was still waiting carefully for the conversation he'd promised and not yet had, that she moved through the estate with the specific wariness of a woman who was not sure whether she was a guest or a prisoner and was watching for evidence either way. He let her watch. He was still deciding himself. On the 4th morning, he asked her to come to his study. She arrived with the same composure she'd had in the SUV, that professional steadiness that was the surface over everything else. She sat across from his desk and looked at him directly, which he'd always respected about her. Most people who sat in that chair flinched. "We have a problem," he said. He watched her register the shift. "What kind?" "Elias Vranas has been asking questions about my personal life for the past 2 weeks. My people intercepted 3 conversations. He doesn't know about Theo yet, but he's looking." The color left her face, not gradually just gone like a light switching off. "How does he know to look?" "He doesn't know what he's looking for. But Vranas is thorough. He's been trying to find leverage against me for years. The search you and Theo represent an unexplained gap in my personal life during a specific window is the kind of anomaly he notices." Nikolas kept his voice even. "It's only a matter of time before he connects the pieces." "So what do we do?" "We move you to the compound." She looked at him. He waited. "How fortified?" she asked. "Extremely." "How far from a hospital?" 40 minutes. "We have a medical suite on site that makes the question largely academic." She was quiet for a moment, then, "How long?" "Until the threat is neutralized." "And what does neutralized mean?" "It means Vranas stops being a problem." The silence was very specific. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I came back because Theo was dying. I stayed because I owe you the chance to know him, to be his father. But if this becomes what I ran from—" She stopped, chose her words. "If this becomes a cage, Nikolas, I will find a way out of it, even from a fortified compound. You should know that about me." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know that about you," he said. "You demonstrated it quite effectively 18 months ago." She flinched. He hadn't meant it to be kind. "The compound is protection," he said, "not punishment. But I won't lie to you about what it looks like from the outside. It looks like walls. It is walls. And for now, that's what Theo needs." She met his eyes. "And what do I need?" "What you need," he said carefully, "is what we discuss, together, starting now." It wasn't a concession exactly. It wasn't quite an offer. But it was the closest thing to openness that Nikolas Theron had extended to another person in as long as he could remember. And from the look on her face, she understood that. She took a slow breath. "Okay," she said. "Tell me about the compound." Outside, somewhere in the estate, they could both hear Theo, his laughter carrying through the building's silence, unbothered and enormous, filling every room it could reach. Nikolas looked toward the sound. Then he looked back at Mara. "It has a garden," he said, "and a room I had painted yesterday, jungle animals on the walls." A pause. "I thought he might like it." Her face did something he hadn't seen before, something unguarded and raw and briefly completely open. Then she looked away and it was gone. "He would love that," she said quietly. "Good." Nikolas stood. "We leave tomorrow." He walked out. And in the hallway out of sight, he stood for a moment with his hand flat against the wall, letting the stillness settle back into him. Not the cold stillness he'd cultivated for years, but something different. Something with a heartbeat in it. Something that felt uncomfortably, impossibly, like the beginning of the rest of his life. Andreas Theron arrived the way he always did, unannounced. carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of something expensive, filling a doorway with an amount of personality that rooms were rarely designed to accommodate. He was 31 to Nikolas's 38, and the 7 years between them might as well have been a canyon for everything the gap contained. Andreas had grown up in a version of the family that had already shed its roughest edges, had been given a university education and a legitimate career in corporate law, had been deliberately shaped by their father to be the thing Nikolas couldn't be, a face that could stand in sunlight. He was charming and quick and functionally reckless in a way that Nikolas had long since stopped trying to correct, and he was the one person alive whose presence Nikolas consistently failed to find exhausting. He was also standing in the study at 7 in the morning holding 2 glasses of wine, which was unusual even for him. Stavros told me, Andreas said, setting 1 glass on the desk, a woman and a child. Except not just any woman. The woman. Nikolas picked up the glass, did not drink it. You spoke to Dax. Everyone speaks to Dax eventually. He has a face that inspires confession. Andreas dropped into the chair across the desk with the self-possession of a man who had grown up in this house and reserved the right to make himself comfortable in all of it. The child is yours, not a question. His name is Theo, Nikolas said. He's 18 months old. Andreas stared at him. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound that held genuine astonishment underneath the surface. You're serious. I am never not serious. You have a child, a whole actual small human child, who is 50% you, and I didn't know. No one knew, because she ran. Andreas's voice shifted slightly, the humor receding. She ran and didn't tell you. Yes, and now she's here because he was sick. She needed help. Nikolas set the glass down. She had no other options. Andreas was quiet for a moment. He was studying Nikolas with the particular attention he deployed when he was seeing something he hadn't expected to see, assessing, recalibrating. How do you feel about it? I feel about it the way I feel about most unexpected developments. I'm managing it. That's not what I asked. Nikolas looked at his brother. Andreas looked back unhurried with the patience of a younger man who had spent his whole life waiting for his older brother to say real things. I've missed 18 months, Nikolas said finally. 18 months I can't recover. He walked and I didn't see it. He said his first word and I wasn't there. She made that decision. She made it unilaterally without asking, without trusting me with the question of whether I could be something other than what I was. The anger was there in the words, controlled but audible. And she was wrong. And she was also not entirely wrong. And I don't know what to do with both of those things being true at the same time. Andreas was quiet. She thinks I'm going to cage her, Nikolas said. Move them to the compound control, everything turn protection into imprisonment. She's preparing for it. I can see her preparing. Are you? I'm trying not to. Trying, Andreas repeated in the tone of a man noting a word that carries significant freight. That's growth, honestly, for you. That's not helpful. What I'm saying, and I know you don't want to hear it, is that you have one chance here. One. She came back because she had no choice. She'll stay because she chooses to, or she won't stay at all, and you know that. So the question isn't how you keep her. The question is whether you can be the kind of person she'd choose. Andreas stood retrieving his untouched glass. That's a harder problem than the Vranas situation. I'd start working on it. He left without waiting for a response. Nikolas sat in the study for a long time after his brother was gone. Outside, he could hear Theo. Somewhere in the estate, his son was laughing at something. The sound traveled through the building's careful silence and reached the study like a question he didn't have an answer for yet. He poured the wine down the drain. Then he went to find them. The compound was exactly what it looked like and nothing else. Mara had expected Nikolas to dress it up somehow, to present the fortress as something it wasn't the way powerful men tended to present things they wanted you to accept. She'd anticipated soft language, careful framing, the careful management of her perspective that he'd always been good at. Instead, he'd simply said it was a compound and let her form her own conclusions on the drive, in which was almost worse. High concrete walls topped with wire. Guard towers at each corner with men in them who were watching. A single reinforced gate that required 3 clearance passes to open. Inside, clean lines, steel and glass, every surface designed for function rather than beauty. Armed men at each building entrance, not conspicuously, but there the kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. It looked like what it was. Theo held against her hip as they crossed from the car to the main building entrance, turned his head in every direction, absorbing the compound with the comprehensive attention of an 18-month-old encountering a new environment. He showed no distress. He showed no preference. He craned his neck toward one of the guard towers and waved. The guard, to his credit, waved back. He doesn't know any better yet, Mara said. He knows people are paying attention to him, Nikolas said at her side. He likes it. He wasn't wrong. Theo had a performer's relationship with attention that had been apparent since approximately month 6, and which Mara had never quite figured out where he'd gotten. Watching Nikolas navigate the compound staff, the way they deferred to him, the way his presence rearranged the air in any room he entered, she was beginning to understand. The room they'd prepared for Theo was on the second floor of the residential wing. She rounded the corner and stopped. The mural covered 3 walls. Jungle dense and layered the kind of background to foreground detail that suggested someone had spent genuine time on it. Elephants in tall grass. A giraffe at the far left whose neck stretched toward the ceiling. Bright-colored birds in the painted canopy. In the center of the main wall, a lion resting enormous, benevolent, exactly the kind of authority that small children found reassuring rather than threatening. Theo inhaled sharply. Then he pointed. Big, he said. Nikolas, who had somehow appeared at her other side, which one? Theo pointed again. The lion. Specific and unambiguous. That's the biggest one, Nikolas agreed. Theo looked at him. Considered this answer. Then he nodded once with the solemnity of a person confirming a fact he'd already known and squirmed to get down. Mara set him on the floor. He crossed immediately to the lion and stood in front of it with his hands on his hips. Nikolas watched him. His expression was doing that thing Mara had started to notice over the past 3 days. The thing where the control slipped and something real came through quickly before he could catch it. She'd learned not to look directly at it. The way you didn't look directly at something you weren't supposed to see. The staff had a day, Nikolas said. The artist works fast. It's extraordinary, Mara said. It's what he deserved. She looked at him at that. He was still watching Theo. You keep saying things like that, she said carefully. Things like what? Things that assume you already know what he deserves, what he wants, what he needs. She kept her voice neutral. You've known him for 4 days. His jaw tightened. What's your point? My point is that I know him, and I need that to mean something. Even here, even in your compound. She paused. I'm not trying to fight you, Nikolas. I'm trying to tell you that we have to do this together, or it doesn't work. He was quiet for a moment. Theo had moved on from the lion and was now inspecting the giraffe with the same serious deliberateness. Tell me about him, Nikolas said. Not a concession, an opening. He talks constantly. He has strong opinions about food, specifically that most food is unacceptable and bananas are an exception. He doesn't sleep unless you've tired him out completely, which takes longer than should be physically possible. She watched Theo. He loves music, any kind. He dances to things that aren't music too, traffic sounds, the washing machine. He hears rhythm in everything. She stopped. He looks at you, she said, the way he looks at things he's already decided about, like he doesn't need more information. Nikolas was very still. He decided about you in about 40 seconds, Mara said. He doesn't know me. No. But he knows something about you, something essential. She looked at Nikolas's profile. I've spent 18 months deciding what you were. He did it faster. The silence stretched. Theo had discovered a toy chest in the corner and opened it with a shout of discovery, pulling items out and distributing them around the room in the chaotic geography of early childhood. I'm not good at this, Nikolas said. Quiet. The quality of admission in a man who rarely admitted to anything. Nobody is at first. I've never... He stopped. Started again. The people I care about, I protect by controlling the variables. That's how I know they're safe. That's how I know I've done my job. He looked at Theo, then at Mara. You are asking me to do something different. Yes. I'm aware that what I've been doing isn't working. I'm aware. A muscle in his jaw moved. I'm working on the alternative. I know you are. She said it simply without softening or sharpening it. Just the fact of it. He looked at her. His dark eyes were very direct, had always been. It was one of the things about him that you couldn't get used to, the way his attention was absolute when he gave it. I need you to be honest with me, he said. About all of it. About what you need, what you're afraid of, what you're planning. Not the version you think I want to hear. The actual truth. That goes both ways. I know. Then yes. She held his gaze. Deal. The first week at the compound was a negotiation conducted through gesture and proximity, and the small, accumulated weight of everyday proximity. Mara learned the rhythms of the security rotation when the guards changed which cameras covered, which approaches the particular logic of the compound's layout that prioritized sightlines over comfort. Nikolas had built it for siege resistance. She was building a life inside it. She had her phone with approved contacts. She had access to the compound's library, the gym, the kitchen. She had Maria Young, warm, efficient, one of 2 household staff Nikolas had brought over from the estate, watching Theo during the hours Mara needed to decompress. She had a suite of rooms that were genuinely comfortable, not punitive. What she didn't have was the ability to leave. Not practically, not safely. She understood the logic. She even agreed with it in the abstract, in the clear-eyed nursing part of her brain that was good at assessing risk without sentiment. Elias Vranas was a real threat. The compound's security was real protection. These facts were not negotiable. It was the lack of control that was the problem. Not the walls themselves, but the absence of agency. The knowledge that her ability to choose anything meaningful had been handed over to Nikolas's judgment, and that his judgment, however well-intentioned, was ultimately his. She was lying awake thinking about this on the 8th night when her door opened. She was upright before she registered who it was. "It's me, Nikolas." He was still dressed. She could see in the lamp she'd left on that he'd been working late. His jacket was gone, his sleeves pushed up, the kind of disheveled that on Nikolas still looked structured somehow. "I'm sorry, Dax said you were awake." "Dax monitors my sleep. Dax monitors everything. It's his primary characteristic." He stayed in the doorway. "Can I come in?" She sat back against the headboard. "What's wrong?" "Nothing acute. I wanted to talk." He looked at her. "I want to tell you something, if you'll listen." She gestured to the chair in the corner. He sat. He was quiet for a moment, and she waited because she'd learned that rushing Nikolas's silences was counterproductive. "My father ran this business for 40 years, he said finally. He was good at it. He was also a hard man in ways that I spent a long time thinking were necessary and have recently begun to reconsider. He believed that the only way to keep people safe was to hold them close and hold them tight, that loosening your grip was the same as abandonment." He looked at his hands. "I learned how to protect people from him. I also learned how to hold on until people suffocated. I've been trying to figure out which of his lessons were useful and which were just his way of living with fear." The room was very quiet. "I'm telling you this," he said, "because you asked me to be honest. And the honest answer to why I operate the way I do is that I was taught to. And I'm not certain all of it should be unlearned, but I'm not certain it shouldn't be either, and He stopped. "I'm trying to make room for the uncertainty. That's new for me." Mara looked at him. "How old were you when you took over?" 26. "And before that?" "I was in the business by 19. My father believed in practical education." A pause. "I've been doing this for 19 years. 18 of those years I was doing it alone." "You weren't alone. You had people who worked for me. That's different." She understood what he was saying. She thought about saying something easy, something reassuring, the kind of warmth that would have been kind but not quite true. Instead, she said, "I know what that's like, being technically surrounded and functionally alone. It's a particular kind of loneliness." He looked at her. "Yes. The past 18 months, she said. "Me and Theo. I had him. He made me less alone than I've ever been. But I was still—" She stopped. "I was still lonely for adult conversation. For someone who understood context I didn't have to explain. For—" She looked away. "It doesn't matter. It matters. I'm not saying it to make a point. I know I'm saying it matters because it does." He leaned forward. "I missed you. Not just Theo, though that's its own thing. That's enormous. I missed you. I want you to know that." The room's silence had changed quality. Mara looked at him for a long moment. "I missed you too," she said. "That was half the problem. It was a lot easier to convince myself I'd made the right choice when I didn't think about you. The thinking about you was the inconvenient part." Something moved across his face. "So we both did this. We both did this. We both made choices without the other one." He paused. "That means we're starting from somewhere, even if it's not where we should have been." She considered this. "That's a generous framing. I have a vested interest." She almost smiled, not quite. "So do I." The alarm went off at 11:14 the following Wednesday. Mara had been in the compound's garden with Theo, a small interior courtyard, walled on all sides, planted with rosemary and lemon trees and a patch of actual grass that Nikolas had apparently installed because Theo needed somewhere to run. She'd been watching her son demolish a dandelion with methodical focus. Maria had been sitting on the bench nearby with a book. The sound cut through everything. Maria moved first. Training fast and clean, she was on her feet with Theo before Mara had finished processing, crossing to the interior door. "Inside," Maria said. "Now." They ran. The residential wing's interior doors locked automatically when the alarm triggered. Mara heard the bolts engage as Maria pushed them through. Theo was crying. The alarm's pitch was wrong for him, too sharp, and he pressed his face into Maria's neck with his hands over his ears. "Stay here." Maria set Theo down, locked the inner door. "Don't open this for anyone." She disappeared into the compound's security wing. Mara gathered Theo, held him, moved to the far wall, the way her nursing training and 2 weeks of compound protocols had combined to suggest. Away from doors, away from windows. She counted his respirations without meaning to. Gunfire. Real, distinct, terrifyingly close. Theo screamed. Mara held him and said, "Shh, baby, I've got you," which was technically true and practically insufficient, and kept her back to the wall and listened. Minutes. Too many minutes. She was calculating exits when the door opened. She was on her feet before she finished registering who it was. Nikolas. He was still moving when he cleared the doorway, fast, controlled his jacket dark, with something she categorically refused to identify right now. His gun was in his hand. His eyes swept the room with the specific efficiency of a man completing a threat assessment. And when they landed on her and Theo, she saw something collapse in him. Just briefly. Just enough. "Are you hurt?" Not a question, a demand. "No." She was already moving toward him. "We're fine. Neither of us is hurt." "What? Vranas?" He crossed to them in 2 strides. His free hand found her face, cupped her jaw, tilted her head, checking her over with a thoroughness that was clinical and desperate at once. "He sent a team. They breached the south perimeter." "How many?" "It's handled." She looked at the dark stain on his jacket. "Nikolas, I'm fine." He pulled her and Theo against him. Theo, who had stopped crying, grabbed Nikolas's shirt with both hands and held on. "It's handled. Everyone on our side is okay." "And theirs." A pause. "Not okay." She closed her eyes. "How did they find us?" "That's what I'm going to spend the next 24 hours determining." His arm tightened around them. "But right now, I need you to know you're safe. Both of you. I need you to know that." She felt him shake. Just once, barely perceptible, the way large structures revealed stress before anyone else could see it. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat underneath. Hard and fast and real. "I know," she said. They stood in the locked room while the compound security apparatus ran its protocols around them, and Mara held her son and pressed her hand against Nikolas Theron's chest, and neither of them said anything more, because there was nothing else that needed to be said right then. He found her later in the garden. The lemon trees were very still. The courtyard had been swept by security, declared clear, returned to civilian use with the compound's characteristic efficiency. It was almost normal, which was the most unsettling part of it. She was sitting on the stone bench. He sat beside her. "Theo's asleep," she said. Maria gave him warm milk and read him 3 books. And he went down without a fight, which means he exhausted himself being scared. He's resilient. He's 18 months old. He doesn't understand threat level assessments. He just knows something was loud and wrong, and then it stopped. Nikolas was quiet. "I can't do this," Mara said. He stiffened. "Not leave," she said, before he could respond to that. "Not run. I'm not talking about running." She turned to face him. "I'm talking about this existing inside a siege, waiting for the next breach, watching my son be terrified by the sounds of your war. I can't raise him this way, even if it's safe, even if the walls are high enough." She searched his face. "You understand that, don't you?" His jaw worked. "Yes." "So what do we do?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she almost spoke again. Then he said, "I end it." "What does that mean?" "It means I go to Vranas directly, face-to-face, neutral ground, and I give him something he wants badly enough that touching my family stops being an option he considers." Her blood went cold. "That's not negotiation. That's walking into... It's negotiation with a man who respects one currency, demonstrated willingness to lose something you value in exchange for peace." His voice was even. "I have something he's wanted for 10 years. The Saronic contracts, the deepwater harbor licenses that give whoever holds them effective control of southern shipping routes. I offer him a portion, enough to change his calculus. You'd give up something that significant." Without hesitation. He looked at her steadily. Without hesitation. She held his gaze. The evening was quiet around them. The compound's perimeter lights coming on as dusk fell, the shapes of armed men visible at the towers like a dark grammar she was learning to read. "I'm coming with you," she said. He turned to look at her fully. "No." "Yes." "Mara, you said partnership." She kept her voice level. "You sat in a room and told me you were working on a different way. This is the different way. You don't go alone into a room with Elias Vranas and negotiate for our safety while I sit in this compound waiting to find out if you come back." She held his gaze. "We do this together, or you haven't changed anything." The silence between them was long. "It's dangerous," he said. "I know. If anything goes wrong, then we deal with it. Together." She didn't look away. "I'm not fragile, Nikolas. I'm very tired of being treated like I am." He looked at her for a long time. The lemon trees moved slightly in the evening air. Somewhere above them, the compound's surveillance cameras tracked their small circle of garden with impassive attention. "Okay," he said. She exhaled. "Okay. But if I give you a signal, I'll know it," she said. "And we'll argue about whether I use it afterward." Something almost like a smile crossed his face. Just for a moment, he reached out and took her hand. Neither of them moved. The evening settled around them, and Theo slept somewhere above, and the walls stood very tall against the sky, and for the first time since she'd dialed that number in the dark of the Glyphata apartment, Mara Calloway felt something settle in her chest that was not exactly peace, but was in the same neighborhood. She was done running. She wasn't sure yet what came after running, but she was beginning to think it might be this.
Well,
Dax brought the intelligence report at midnight. Nikolas read it at the desk in the compound security room, the screens around him showing feeds from every approach angle the compound rendered in green-tinged night vision into something that looked like a map of a war that hadn't fully declared itself yet. Dax stood at his shoulder. Neither of them sat. 3 men from the breach team were Vranas' direct operators, Dax said. Not contractors. His own people. "He's escalating. He's testing. There's a difference." Dax set a photograph on the desk. This man coordinated the approach. His name is Petros Halias. He's been Vranas' operational lead for 8 years. Vranas doesn't send Halias unless the target matters. Nikolas looked at the photograph. He sent his best people for an information-gathering breach. He wanted to know if you'd react the way you reacted, and now he knows. He knows I have people worth protecting. He knows the compound isn't just infrastructure. Dax's voice was neutral. He knows it's a home. Nikolas was quiet. "The meeting request," Dax said. "You want me to move on it? Tomorrow morning, neutral ground not anywhere either faction owns. The Piraeus Warehouse District. Tell him I'm coming with 2 people. He brings 2, no more." Dax made a note. "And the other request." Nikolas looked up. "Miss Calloway has asked whether she can call her sister." He held. "She has a sister. In Melbourne. They've apparently been out of contact for 18 months. She submitted the request through the approved channel, which she technically didn't have to do." Dax paused. "She did it anyway." Nikolas thought about this. About Mara operating inside the compound's security framework, as if she'd chosen to be there, as if the rules were a courtesy. She was extending rather than a cage she was locked in. About what that cost her, and what it meant. "Approve it," he said. Dax nodded. "Monitored?" "Obviously. But," he paused. "Don't interrupt it. Don't flag content for review unless there's a real concern. Let her have the conversation." Dax regarded him for a moment with the careful neutrality of a man who had decided opinions about his employer's personal life and had the professional discipline to keep them to himself. "Yes, Sir Sid," he said. After he left, Nikolas turned back to the security feeds. The compound's perimeter lights cast even pools across the approaches. The guard towers were occupied. Everything looked the way it was supposed to look, which meant nothing and everything. He thought about Mara's hand in his in the garden, the weight and warmth of it, the fact that she'd reached back. He thought about a photograph in the intelligence file. He hadn't shown her yet. A photograph that Dax had flagged 3 weeks ago, and that Nikolas had been sitting on, uncertain what to do with, uncertain what it meant for everything they were trying to build. A photograph of a man named Yorgos Calloway, Harbor Inspector, Port Authority of Piraeus, deceased 4 years ago in what had been ruled an accidental fall from a container vessel under review. Mara's father. The vessel in question had been registered to the Theron Group. Nikolas closed the intelligence file. He sat in the dark of the security room for a long time, watching the feeds, listening to the compound's quiet, turning the problem over in his mind, the way he turned all hard problems slowly, systematically, without flinching from the shape of them. He needed to tell her. The question was when and how, and whether the truth which had the potential to rewrite everything she believed about why she'd run would bring them closer to what they were building or burn it to the ground before it could fully stand. He didn't have a good answer. He went to bed without sleeping, which was not unusual, and lay in the dark thinking about a harbor inspector who had died on a Theron ship 4 years ago, and a woman who had spent 18 months running from the man who had unknowingly inherited that death's consequences, and a small boy who slept 3 rooms away with his hands curled into fists and his face completely at peace. Some truths he'd learned had timing. He had to figure out whether this one had run out. Mara called her sister at 9 in the morning. She sat on the bed in her suite with the approved handset Nikolas had given her, her own phone back that morning, without ceremony, without explanation, which was somehow its own kind of statement, and waited through the international connection and the 3 rings, and then her sister's voice, confused and careful. "Hello, it's me," Mara said. Silence. Then Mara. "Oh my God, Mara." Her name and her sister's voice, with that particular weight of a person who hadn't known if they'd hear from you again. "I'm okay," Mara said, because that was always the first thing. "I'm okay, Theo's okay." "Where are you?" "We've been..." A breath. "Mum's been sick. Not badly, but Mara, we didn't know." I know, and I'm sorry. I couldn't risk it was complicated." She pressed her fingers against her eyes. "I can't explain everything right now, but I'm safe. We're both safe. I'm in Athens." "Athens?" Her sister's voice shifted. "You went back." "Sort of. Is he there?" She knew who he was. Mara had told her sister more than she'd told anyone else in a single late-night conversation 18 months ago. The night before she'd run a conversation, she'd made her sister promise to forget. "Yes," Mara said. A long pause. And it's complicated, and I'm figuring it out." She looked out the window of her suite, over the compound's interior courtyard, the lemon trees standing quiet in the morning light. "He knows about Theo. He loves him, Elise. You should see them together. It's..." She stopped. "It's not what I was afraid of. It's something else entirely." "What does that mean?" "I don't know yet. Honest." The only way she knew how to talk to her sister. "I'm learning what it means." Elise was quiet. Then, "Are you happy?" Mara thought about the garden last night. Nikolas's hand. The way the compound's alarm had sounded, and he'd come running, and she'd known without any ambiguity that he'd come for them first. "I think I'm getting there," she said. The morning after the call, Nikolas came to find her in the library. She was reading, genuinely reading, which felt almost decadent. The compound's substantial library being one of its few unambiguous virtues, and she looked up when he appeared in the doorway. He was dressed for business. Jacket, the particular quality of stillness that meant he'd been up for hours. "I need to show you something," he said. She put down her book. He set a folder on the table. She looked at him before she opened it. His face was very controlled, which told her more than whatever was inside. She opened the folder. A photograph. A man in his late 50s, silver at his temples, standing on a harbor dock with his back to the camera. Something familiar in the set of the shoulders. Something that landed in her chest before her mind caught up. She turned the page. An incident report. Port Authority Piraeus. 4 years ago. A fall from the stern deck of a container vessel. Death ruled accidental pending review. Ruling confirmed review inconclusive due to degraded evidence. The vessel's name, she read it twice. Looked up at Nikolas. "Theron Group Registry," she said. Her voice came out flat. "Professional." "Yes." "The review was inconclusive." "Yes." "What does that mean?" He sat down across from her. The table was a barrier which she suspected was deliberate. "It means the investigation was insufficient. My team has reviewed the original evidence logs over the past 3 weeks. There were inconsistencies in the initial response crew member statements that don't align a security camera gap during the relevant window." He was very precise. "I don't know what happened. I want to be clear about that. I don't know. But it wasn't definitely an accident. It wasn't definitively ruled either way. The review that should have happened didn't happen." He paused. "I've opened an internal investigation. Full scope. If there's something to find, we'll find it." She looked at her father's photograph. The dock. The harbor. The ship that had been registered to the man sitting across from her. "You've known for 3 weeks," she said. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know..." He stopped. "I wanted to have more answers first. That was a mistake. You deserve to know." She sat with it, all of it. The accumulated weight of coincidence and connection and the universe's particular black humor about letting people run from one thing and walk directly into its consequence. "I'm not angry at you," she said slowly. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not you didn't know. I didn't know." She turned the photograph over. "But I want to know what happened to him. Yes, I want the actual truth. Not a managed version. Not whatever protects the company. You'll have it." His voice was absolute. "Whatever we find." She looked at him, at the way he held her gaze without deflecting, without the careful management she'd have expected. The way he had sat down across from her and put a folder between them that implicated his family's business and then waited for her to read it. "You could have buried this," she said. "Yes? Why didn't you?" He looked at her steadily. "Because you asked me to be honest with you, and I meant it when I said it would go both ways." She nodded slowly. Her hands were very still on the table. "Okay," she said. "Then we find out." They sat across from each other in the library, the folder between them, the compound's morning settling around them in its quiet, institutional way, and Mara looked at the man she'd run from and then run back to and thought about all the ways people were connected to each other without knowing all the invisible threads that ran between lives, all the things you couldn't know until you stopped running long enough to look. "Nikolas," she said. He looked at her. "The meeting with Vranas. I'm still coming." His jaw moved. Then, "I know." The morning light came through the library's high windows and lay across the table between them, and outside Theo was waking up in his jungle room, and the compound's walls stood tall against a sky that was, for the moment, entirely clear. Andreas arrived that afternoon unannounced, which was becoming a pattern. He came through the compound's security screening with the resigned tolerance of a man who found the biometric check personally undignified and professionally inevitable, emerged in the main building's atrium, shaking his jacket back into order, and found Mara and Theo in the courtyard. He regarded them for a moment with the open curiosity that was his default setting. "You're shorter than I imagined," he said. Mara looked up from the blanket she'd spread on the grass, where Theo was conducting an investigation of a beetle with the intense focus of someone who has discovered a new field of inquiry. "Andreas Theron," she said. It wasn't a question. "The same." He looked at Theo. His expression shifted into something genuine. "And this is the famous Theo." "He's not famous. He is inside these walls. The staff have spent a week being extremely careful not to be obviously charmed by him, and failing completely." Andreas crouched at the blanket's edge. Theo looked up, assessed him the way he assessed all new information, and then held out the beetle. Andreas regarded the beetle. "That's an impressive beetle," he said. Theo nodded. "Big," he confirmed. "Your vocabulary seems to have a theme," Andreas observed. "He identifies scale first," Mara said, "then category. It's actually quite systematic." "He gets that from Nikolas, who would absolutely have identified the beetle as large before anything else." Andreas looked at her. "How are you finding the compound?" "It's very well secured." "It is. It's also deeply inhospitable as a living environment. Nikolas knows this and is not as troubled by it as he should be because Nikolas's baseline for livability is extreme." He sat on the edge of the blanket with the casualness of someone who had decided he was welcome. "Has he told you about the house?" Mara looked at him sharply. "What house?" Andreas went carefully still. "Andreas, what house?" A pause that had the quality of a man who has said something he intended to hold back. That, he said, may have been Nikolas's to disclose. "He's been arranging something." "I've said too much." "You've said exactly enough." She studied him. "He asked you to handle something." Andreas considered the options available to him. "I will say only that my brother, who has never once in his life prioritized comfort over security, has recently developed an opinion about school districts." He stood with the briskness of someone changing the subject structurally, which is a notable development. He transferred his attention back to Theo, who had lost interest in the beetle and was now attempting to stand on Andreas's shoe. "Do you want to see a magic trick?" Andreas said. Theo said, "Yes." Andreas produced a coin from nowhere, made it disappear, made it reappear from Theo's ear. Theo's face cycled through amazement and accusation, and then broke into a laugh that bounced off the courtyard walls and scattered. Mara watched her son with this man who was related to Nikolas in the easy, uncalculated way of people who share blood without sharing guard. The way Andreas engaged with the world that Nikolas couldn't, and the way Nikolas held the world together so Andreas could afford to be that way. And thought about school districts, and about what it meant for a man who had built a fortress to be quietly researching the neighborhoods around it. She thought about staying, not being kept, not being unable to leave, choosing. The difference was everything. She looked up and found Nikolas standing in the doorway to the main building watching them. He'd changed from his morning jacket jeans, now sleeves rolled, the version of him that existed only inside compound walls. He was watching Theo and Andreas. His expression was doing that thing again, the crack in the control where the real thing came through. She didn't look away this time. He met her eyes, held them. She thought, I know about the house. You were going to tell me. That matters. She thought, there is a man who died on one of your ships, and I don't know what that means yet, and neither do you, and we're going to find out together. She thought your son thinks you are exactly as large as you are and is not afraid of it. She thought, I'm not running. Nikolas held her gaze from across the courtyard. The evening was coming in over the compound walls, the light going gold and horizontal. Theo, shrieking at another of Andreas's tricks, the lemon trees standing fragrant and still. He nodded, very slightly. She nodded back. Theo ran to him, then crossing the courtyard on determined small legs, shouting, Dada! With the complete conviction of a person who has decided how things are, and Nikolas crouched and caught him, and stood with his son in his arms, and his gaze still on Mara, and she sat on the blanket in the compound's carefully landscaped courtyard, and felt the last of something she'd been carrying since the night she'd left dissolve quietly into the evening air. Not forgiveness? Not yet. Not resolution. There were too many things unresolved for that, too many truths still being excavated, too much history sitting between them, waiting to be processed. But something, the beginning of something, the kind of beginning that if you tended it carefully and chose it over and over again, had a chance of becoming something real. She stayed until the stars came out. That was not a conscious decision. Not exactly. It was the accumulated weight of small things, Theo falling asleep in Nikolas's arms in the middle of the coin trick, Andreas making his exit with the cheerful tactlessness of a man who recognized a scene requiring privacy. The evening settling around them in the compound's walled quiet until it was just the two of them and the sleeping child between them, and the particular quality of silence that belongs to people who have run out of performance and are left with whatever they actually are. He's going to sleep on your shoulder, Mara said. I know. Nikolas had not moved. I don't mind. She looked at him. You should mind. You have a security debrief at 9 tomorrow and a logistics meeting at 11, and Dax will absolutely brief me on your schedule if I ask him. Dax is a profoundly disloyal employee. Dax is practical. There's a difference. A pause. I'm told that's the Theron family line. She almost laughed. Almost. He looked at her over Theo's sleeping head, his dark eyes steady in the compound's evening lights, and said, I should have told you about the harbor report the day I found it. Yes? I was protecting myself, not you. He held her gaze. That's the honest version. She looked at him for a long moment. I know. I'm telling you anyway, don't do it again. I won't. Okay? He stood carefully adjusting Theo's weight against his shoulder and extended his other hand. She looked at it. Then she took it. They went inside together. The meeting with Elias Vranas was set for a Thursday. 3 days of preparation, which was not enough and also entirely sufficient. Nikolas had operated on less preparation than this for situations with significantly higher stakes, and the machinery of his security apparatus ran with a practiced efficiency that required minimal oversight once pointed in a direction. Dax had selected the venue, a disused warehouse in the Piraeus Industrial District. Neutral in the specific sense that meant neither side owned it or the men who might be inside it. Transport was arranged, approaches, identified contingencies mapped in the precise, exhaustive way that Nikolas required, and Dax had long since learned to anticipate. What Nikolas had not anticipated was the conversation that happened on Wednesday night. He found her in the internal investigation room, a space he'd turned over to the harbor inquiry, where the evidence files on Georgos Calloway's death had been assembled and organized with the careful thoroughness his team brought to anything he identified as a priority. She was sitting at the table with her father's personnel file open in front of her, not reading it exactly, her hands flat on either side of it. He stopped in the doorway. Mara. She looked up. Her eyes were dry. That was somehow worse than if they hadn't been. The lead investigator sent his preliminary findings this afternoon, she said. Dax gave them to me. He came into the room, sat across from her. The camera gap was deliberate, she said. Someone killed the feed for 11 minutes. The timing matches the window when my father would have been on the stern deck. She looked at the file. He wasn't alone on that deck. There was a second crew member in the vicinity whose testimony was inconsistent. That person left the Theron Group's employ 3 weeks after the incident with a severance package that was 60,000 euros above the standard formula. Nikolas had seen the same report. Someone on your payroll killed him, she said. Or helped someone who did. Someone who was on my payroll 4 years ago, yes. He kept his voice steady. The investigation is looking for who authorized the severance, who had the authority and the motive. And if you find them, when, not if, when you find them. She looked at him. What happens? He looked back at her. What do you want to happen? I want to know the truth. I want to know who decided my father's life was an acceptable cost for whatever he knew or saw or threatened. Her voice was very even, the steadiness of someone who has already moved through the first shock and is now operating on the other side of it. And then I want there to be consequences. There will be, not your kind, legal consequences. His jaw moved. She watched him calculate, watched him work through the arithmetic of what was possible and what it would cost. We'll do everything we can to build a case that can go to the authorities, he said finally. I can't promise what survives that transition. There are things about how my operation works that complicate police involvement. I know that. You're still asking. Yes. She held his gaze. Because he was my father, and because whatever else is between us, whatever we're building, it has to start with this. It has to start with me knowing that you'll hold your own house accountable, even when it's painful, even when it costs you. The room was very quiet. I know, he said. She nodded once, closed the file. I'm still coming tomorrow, she said. I know that too. She looked at him. Something in her face, not softness exactly, but an absence of the careful distance she'd been maintaining, the armor she'd been adjusting and readjusting since she'd arrived. I don't forgive you for what you didn't know, she said. I want to be clear about that. Whatever happened to my father, you didn't know. I know, but you're going to fix it, and that matters. She stood tucking the file closed with the precise movements of a woman organizing what she can control. Get some sleep. You need to be sharp tomorrow. She walked past him. In the doorway, she stopped. Nikolas, he looked at her. Thank you for not hiding it. She was gone before he could find a response that was adequate. The morning was gray and close, a November sky over Athens pressing down on the city with the particular weight of weather that can't decide what it wants to do. Mara dressed carefully. Not dramatically, not in the way of a woman preparing for theater. In the way of a nurse preparing for a long shift, which was to say practically thoughtfully, choosing clothes that wouldn't restrict movement and shoes that gave actual traction. She pulled her hair back. No jewelry except the small gold band she wore on her right hand, her mother's, which she'd had since the funeral and never taken off. She checked on Theo before she left. He was still asleep, sprawled starfish-wide across the crib mattress, one arm thrown over the stuffed elephant Maria had introduced him to and which had become over the past 2 weeks essential. She stood over him for a moment, listening to his breathing, feeling the familiar weight of the specific love that was her central organizing principle. She would come back to him. That was not negotiable. She walked out. Nikolas was waiting in the atrium. He looked at her with the particular attention he gave to assessments, the thoroughness of it. No longer unsettling the way it had once been, now legible. This was how he said he saw you, how he communicated that you had been registered completely. Ready, she said. Car's waiting. Dax was at the vehicle, 2 additional security personnel flanking the SUV in the pre-dawn gray. Nikolas opened her door first, which she'd noticed he always did now. A small thing, possibly automatic, possibly chosen. She got in. He followed. The convoy moved through Athens in the thin early light, the city assembling itself around them in the way it always did, overlapping layers of old stone and new development, and the particular organized chaos of a metropolis that had been continuously inhabited for 3,000 years and had strong opinions about being interrupted. Tell me about Vranas, she said. 61 years old. He inherited his operation from his father-in-law, which meant he came in as the son-in-law and spent the first decade proving he wasn't provisional. He's been thorough, patient, methodical. He doesn't overextend. He doesn't escalate without provocation. And he holds grudges across time frames that most people don't plan for. Nikolas looked at the city moving past. He respects competence. He respects people who don't flinch when they should. He takes the measure of a person in the first 10 seconds of meeting them and rarely revises his assessment afterward. How do you know? Because I do the same thing. She looked at him. And what's his assessment of you? That I'm the most dangerous person in the room. He's right. A pause. His assessment of you will be formed from what he's heard, which is that you ran from me and came back, and that I sent men to a meeting the night his team breached my compound's south wall and left with a different count than they arrived with. He looked at her. He'll read both of those facts. What he concludes is up to you. She thought about this. What do you want him to conclude? That you're not a weakness. He held her gaze. That you're a choice I made with my eyes open. That touching you is a declaration of war, not leverage. And is that true? Yes. No hesitation. All of it. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned back to the window. Okay, she said, then that's what he'll see. The Piraeus warehouse was vast and empty, and deliberately so. Mara had expected it to feel more dangerous. She'd prepared carefully for something that felt like the edge of a cliff for the specific quality of threat that came from being in a room with men who dealt in violence as commerce. She found instead a space that felt bureaucratic in its own way. Two sides. A table. Terms. Elias Vranos was already there when they arrived. He was smaller than she'd imagined from Nikolas's description. Compact silver-haired, dressed in a suit that was good but not ostentatious. He stood beside a portable table someone had set up in the center of the floor. It was almost exactly right for a signing, she thought, with two men flanking him at discreet distances. He watched them walk in the way you watched, whether assessing intensity direction, what it would mean for you. His eyes moved over Nikolas. Then they moved to her and stayed. Nikolas. His voice carried in the empty space. Accented English, he'd clearly been told they'd be speaking it. You brought company. Mara Calloway. Nikolas's voice was entirely level. You've been asking about her. Save yourself the trouble. Vranos looked at her with the focused, unsentimental attention of a man who had spent 6 decades making accurate assessments of people. Miss Calloway. He inclined his head slightly. I've heard your name. I imagine you have, she said. She kept her voice neutral, professional. The register she'd used in trauma bays with patients who needed calm. Vranos was a man who took the measure of people in their first moments. She could feel it happening in real time. His attention thorough and specific and not remotely threatening in the way it would have been from a lesser person. This was clinical. This was a man deciding what category she went in. She met his eyes and held them. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. You ran from him, Vranos said. 18 months. You came back. Yes. Most people don't come back. Most people don't have a reason to. She paused. I did. The child, among other things. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Nikolas with something that might have been a fractional adjustment of his original assessment. You brought her to make a point, he said. I brought her because she asked to come, Nikolas said, and because we don't operate by making decisions for each other. That's relevant to what I'm about to offer you. Vranos gestured the small, precise movement of a man inviting a proposition. The Saronic deep length contracts, Nikolas said. Both of the Class A licenses. Effective transfer, full operational rights, the harbor relationships that come with them. He paused. In exchange for a declared peace. Documented, with teeth on both sides. The warehouse was very quiet. Vranos studied him. The Saronic contracts are worth 30 million a year to the Theron Group. I know what they're worth. You're giving up 30 million euros a year. He was looking at Nikolas with the expression of a man revising a long-held calculation. For peace. For my family, Nikolas said. Which is worth more. Mara kept her expression still. She'd known the scale of what he was offering. Hearing it stated flatly in this echoing space was something different. Vranos turned to look at her again. And you, he said, you're comfortable with this arrangement. What arrangement? Your partner. The word was careful, neither dismissive nor credulous. Giving up a significant portion of his commercial empire for your safety. I didn't ask him to. No, that's the interesting part. He studied her. You're a nurse. Yes. You don't come from this world. No. And yet you're standing in a warehouse in Piraeus at 6 in the morning, making strategic decisions about a man who runs a criminal empire. He tilted his head. Why? She thought about the right answer. Then she said the true one. Because he's my son's father, and because whatever I thought I was running from 18 months ago, I was wrong. You run from fear until you decide the thing you're afraid of is worth facing. She looked at Vranas steadily. That's where I am. The silence stretched. Then Vranas smiled. It was small and real and reached his eyes in the way that many hadn't been performing it. All right, he said. He looked at Nikolas. Draft the terms. I want the transfer completed within 30 days and a mutual non-aggression clause with a 5-year term. He extended his hand. And tell your people not to send anyone into my territory for 6 months. I need time to absorb the new contracts without interference. Nikolas took his hand. 6 months. 6 months! Vranas' eyes moved to Mara one final time. Take care of him, Miss Calloway? Men like Nikolas don't take care of themselves. I'm aware, she said. Vranas turned and walked out. His 2 men followed. The warehouse was empty in 30 seconds. Mara stood in the center of the floor and breathed. Nikolas moved to her side. He didn't say anything. She could feel the tension leaving him, a systematic release, the way you let a fist open finger by finger. That's it, she said. That's it. He just agreed. He was always going to agree. He wanted the contracts. He was never going to attack my family if he had a better offer. The breach was leverage, not escalation. He was showing me he had the capability, so the negotiation would go his way. Nikolas looked at her. He needed to see you to make the final calculation. She looked at him. What calculation? Whether this was permanent, whether you were a temporary variable or a structural one. He paused. He decided structural. Because I came. Because of what you said. His voice was quiet. Because you told him you'd decided the thing you were afraid of was worth facing. She held his gaze. Was that true? He said. Or was it for him? Both, she said, but mostly true. He was very still. Nikolas. She turned fully toward him. I need to tell you something. Tell me. When I left the night I left, I wasn't only afraid of the violence. I was afraid of this, of what's happening right now. Of caring about you enough that your world becomes my world. Of loving someone whose life is this. She gestured at the warehouse, the gone violence of the morning, the whole elaborate machinery of the life he led. Because if I loved you enough to stay, I'd lose the ability to judge it clearly. And that terrified me more than anything. He was watching her with complete attention. I'm still afraid of it, she said. I want you to know that. I'm not standing here because I've stopped being afraid. I'm standing here because I think the alternative is worse. The alternative is spending the rest of my life being safe and separate and watching Theo wonder where his father is. Mara, I'm not finished. She held up a hand. He stopped. I need this to be different from what I ran from. Not the same arrangement with softer edges. Actually different. I need to be able to say no. I need to be able to disagree with your security assessments and have it be a conversation, not a decree. I need Theo to grow up in a house, not a fortress, even if the fortress exists somewhere in the background for when it's necessary. She looked at him. Can you do that? I'm doing it. You're learning it. That's not the same thing. No, he said. It's not. He looked at her steadily. I'm learning it. I'll keep learning it. That's what I can offer you, not perfection. Work. A pause. With you. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, okay. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. His fingers closed around hers with a firmness that was careful, not claiming the grip of someone who understood the difference. They walked out of the warehouse together into the gray November morning, through the Piraeus industrial district with its smell of salt and machinery, and the deep-water harbor beyond. And Mara thought about her father and the ship, and the things that were still unknown, and thought about Theo waking up in his jungle room and reaching for the stuffed elephant, and thought about the man beside her who had spent 6 weeks learning to open his hands. She thought this is what coming home looks like. Not a place, not a feeling you recognize from before. Something new, something you have to build. The car was waiting. They got in together. Mas. The drive back from Piraeus took 40 minutes. Mara spent the first 20 of them watching the city scroll past the window and feeling the adrenaline of the morning slowly, methodically leave her body. This was familiar, the way you came down off a high-acuity shift, the specific texture of the aftermath. She'd learned to let it happen rather than fighting it, to allow the physical process of decompression to run its course without trying to manage it. Nikolas sat beside her in the silence of someone who understood this. He didn't speak, didn't ask if she was okay, didn't try to fill the quiet with any of the things people filled quiet with when they weren't sure what to do. He simply sat his hand near hers on the seat without touching, present, without pressing. She was aware in the way you became aware of things you'd been actively not noticing how much she'd missed this specific quality of his presence. He was not a man who needed to talk. He was not a man who needed reassurance or reciprocation or the social contract of constant mutual acknowledgement. He existed in a room with you, and that was enough. His attention was complete when he gave it, and his absence was complete when he was somewhere else, and both things were clean and legible in a way that once you'd adjusted to it felt like relief. She'd had conversations in 18 months with people who chattered to fill space, who needed her to look engaged, who took her silence as a problem to be solved. She'd been so tired. She hadn't known how tired until just now. She turned her head and looked at him. He met her gaze. "I'm going to apply for a position at the hospital in Glyfada," she said. "When things have settled, when it feels safe." "I know." She raised an eyebrow. "You're a nurse," he said. "You've been a nurse for 11 years. Being unable to practice is costing you something." He paused. "I've been waiting for you to say it." And I'm going to say that you should, and that Dax will have opinions about the security implications, and that you should listen to them with an open mind and then make your own decision. She looked at him. "That's remarkably reasonable. I've been working on it." "I know you have." She looked at him a moment longer. "For what it's worth, I've been watching. It looks like it's hard." "It is. No performance of ease. Just the fact of it." "I know. I'm telling you I see it." She looked back at the window. "That matters." The city moved past them. The gray had lightened slightly, not resolved but less heavy, the sky somewhere between commitment and indecision. Athens in November. She'd arrived in spring 18 months ago when the city was warm and impossible, and she'd been 27 weeks pregnant and so frightened she could taste it. She'd spent the following months in small apartments in unfamiliar suburbs, learning the city and its functional registers, the clinic on the corner, the market 3 blocks over the bus line that got Theo to the park without requiring a taxi she couldn't reliably afford. She'd learned to love it oddly, the way it folded around you, the way it didn't ask for explanations. "Nikolas," she said. The investigation, your father's operation, the ship." She paused. "How old was the company when the Calloway incident happened?" He was quiet for a moment. "My father had already been ill for 2 years. I'd taken operational control, but I wasn't paying attention to everything I should have been. The transition period was complicated." "You think you might have known something was off?" "I think someone in my organization made a decision they shouldn't have made and decided it wouldn't come back on them. And they were right for 4 years. His voice was hard. "They're going to be wrong about the 4 years after that." She nodded. "I want to meet the lead investigator," she said. "Not to interfere. I want to understand the timeline. I want to know if my father was there that day because of something he discovered or if it was routine and someone panicked." She looked at her hands. "I need to understand what happened." "I'll arrange it. Today, he agreed." She looked at him. "You just agreed very quickly. I've been trying to give you what you ask for before you have to ask twice." He glanced at her. "It's a work in progress, but I've been trying." She almost smiled. The compound gate came into view ahead. Security checkpoint, the familiar sequence of clearances, the gate rolling open to admit them. Mara watched it happen and thought about what Andreas had said, school districts, and thought about what it meant that she was watching this gate with the feeling for the first time of coming back rather than arriving. The investigator's name was Petros Anastasiou. He was 40-something, methodical, with the careful affect of someone who had spent a long time working adjacent to powerful people and had learned to give nothing away through habit rather than calculation. He sat across from Mara at the compound's conference table with his files organized at precise intervals and looked at her with professional courtesy and a baseline of wariness she recognized as standard for anyone who worked for Nikolas. Nikolas sat at the end of the table. He'd said nothing since making the introduction. This was the right call. Mara had asked for this meeting, and it was hers to run. "Walk me through the timeline," she said. Anastasiou did. He was thorough. He didn't soften anything, which she appreciated. She'd asked for that explicitly, and he'd responded to it like someone who'd been told and had decided to take the instructions seriously. The Theron Aegean vessel had been in Piraeus Harbor on a routine customs inspection. Her father had been the senior inspector assigned to the cargo manifest review. The inspection had been flagged internally 2 weeks earlier by someone whose name was redacted in the preliminary file. Anastasiou noted. This said the full name would be in the next report, said he was confident they had it as a potentially problematic review for a reason that remained under investigation. Her father had gone to the stern deck during a break in the inspection process. The camera feed died for 11 minutes. He was found at the base of the hull 18 minutes later. The crew member whose testimony was inconsistent was named Ioannis Dimitriou. He had accepted the severance package and left Greece within a month. His current location was unknown. What was the cargo? Mara said. Anastasiou glanced at Nikolas. Tell her, Nikolas said. The manifest listed standard industrial equipment. The internal concern that had been flagged was that the manifest might not have been accurate. There were indications that the actual cargo included material that would have failed port inspection. What kind of material? A pause. At the time, the Theron Group had some subsidiary operations that are no longer part of the company's holdings. Operations that involved, not to put it euphemistically, goods that didn't travel through official channels. Mara looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at Nikolas. Your company was smuggling, she said. A subsidiary was, under old management that I removed approximately 3 years ago when I found out. His jaw was tight. The timing matters. Your father's inspection was 2 months before I identified and eliminated that operation. If I'd moved faster. You didn't know to move faster. No. So someone panicked because my father was about to find what was in the hold. That's the working hypothesis, Anastasiou said carefully. Mara sat with this for a moment. The shape of it. The terrible smallness of it, her father's life ending because of a cargo manifest, because someone had panicked on behalf of an operation that hadn't survived the following year anyway, because the man she was now sitting across from hadn't known in time. She looked at Nikolas. He held her gaze without deflecting. He'd been doing that more, looking at the hard things directly instead of managing them. I need the person who made the call, she said. Whoever authorized the severance. Whoever decided my father was an acceptable cost. We'll find them, and then they go to the police. He nodded. To the police. With everything we have. Your investigation, the evidence, the chain of decisions. You don't protect anyone. No one will be protected. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned to Anastasiou. Thank you. I'd like updates weekly. Of course. Directly to me. Not through intermediaries. He looked at Nikolas again. Nikolas said, directly to her. No hesitation. Anastasiou collected his files and left with the purposeful efficiency of a man who understood when he was being dismissed. They were alone in the conference room. Are you okay? Nikolas said. She thought about the question. I will be. She looked at the table. I'm angry. I'm going to be angry for a while, but not at you. She paused. Which is interesting, because 6 weeks ago I would have included you automatically. I know. You're different from what I told myself you were, she said. When I was running, I built a version of you in my head that was easier to leave. A version that was just the dangerous thing. The control and the empire and the blood on the shirts. She looked at him. I left out the other parts. I probably was more like the version you built at the time. Maybe, but people change. I'm trying to. I know. She stood, looked at the door, then back at him. Come on. Theo's going to be waking up from his nap about now, and he's going to want to show you the elephant's new name, which Maria tells me he changed this morning. Nikolas stood. What is the new name? You'll have to ask him. She walked out. He followed. In the hallway, she heard from somewhere above them the specific sound of a toddler awakening. A brief silence. Then the summons loud and completely confident of being heard. Dada. She looked at Nikolas. He was already moving toward the stairs. She followed him up. That evening, after Theo was asleep, and Andreas had come and gone, and the compound had settled into its nighttime protocols, Mara found herself in the garden again. The lemon trees were silver in the dark. The compound's perimeter lights cast their low pools across the outer walls. Somewhere beyond those walls, the city continued its 3,000-year conversation with itself. Nikolas sat beside her. They were quiet for a long time. The house Andreas mentioned, she said. She felt him still. He told me he'd said too much, she said. I want to hear the rest from you. A pause. Then, I found it 2 weeks ago. 3 bedrooms, a yard, good school catchment area. It's registered in your name. He paused again. I wasn't going to tell you yet. I wanted to have more done first. More progress on the investigation, more stability with Vranas, more... He stopped. More certainty that you'd want it. She looked at him. You bought me a house. I bought us an option. It's yours. If you don't want it, Nikolas. She looked at him steadily. Why didn't you ask me first? He was quiet. That's the question, she said. Not whether I want it, whether you understand what it means to make that kind of decision without asking. He held her gaze. I was afraid, he said, that if I asked, you'd say it was too much, too fast, that you'd see it as exactly the kind of claiming move you'd been preparing for. He paused. So I made it and planned to present it as a choice rather than a decision. But it was a decision. Yes. She looked at the lemon trees. So ask me now. He looked at her. Ask me now, she said again. Like you should have from the beginning. He was quiet for a moment. Then, in the careful way of a man choosing his words precisely, would you want to live somewhere that is not a fortress? With Theo. With me when I can be there, which I know isn't always. He paused. Would that be something you'd choose? She looked at him. The compound walls, the perimeter lights, the extraordinary distance she'd traveled from the Glyfada apartment, and the terrified phone call, and the 18 months of running before that. Yes, she said. She felt him exhale. Not tomorrow, she said. When it's safe. When the investigation has progressed. When we've built enough of this that it's real. Agreed. But yes. He took her hand. She let him. His thumb moved across her knuckles in that specific way he had not. Nervous, not absent, deliberate. Saying something he didn't have words for yet. They sat until the city's lights came on fully against the dark, and the lemon trees stood silver and fragrant, and the compound's walls held everything they'd built so far in their careful, imperfect arms. The investigation delivered its first major finding 10 days later. Anastasiu brought it in person. He set the file on Nikolas's desk with the careful gravity of a man delivering news that has weight and knows it, and Nikolas read it twice, and then he called Mara. She came in 5 minutes. She read it. The authorization for the severance package had originated from a man named Stavrianos Pavlos. Stavrianos, logistics coordinator, Theron Group Piraeus operations 10 years with the company. He'd left the company 14 months ago. His departure had been characterized in his file as a voluntary resignation for personal reasons, which was now characterized differently in light of the investigation as almost certainly an arranged exit time to coincide with the statute of limitations window. His current location, Crete. His connection to Dimitri, the crew member, with the inconsistent testimony established. Phone records, financial transfers, a shared address during the critical window. The cargo in the hold the day of the inspection confirmed. Industrial components serving as cover for electronics components whose export was restricted under international sanctions regulations. Enough to have the vessel seized. Enough to have criminal charges brought. Enough, almost certainly, for a harbor inspector doing his job carefully to have recognized as a problem. Her father had known. He'd been about to report it, and someone had made a calculation. Mara sat with the file for a long time. Nikolas waited. Anastasiu waited. Crete, she said finally. Yes, Anastasiu said, we have his address. And the police. I've been in contact with the Serious Crimes Unit. They're aware of the investigation. They want everything we have, the evidence chain, the witness connections, the financial transfers. He paused. They'd like to move on Stavrianos within the next 2 weeks before he has reason to disappear again. She looked at Nikolas. This is going forward. Everything we have, he said. I told you. She nodded slowly. Her father's personnel file was still on the corner of the desk from the previous meeting. She'd looked at it many times in the past week. She looked at it now. He was good at his job, she said. He took it seriously. He thought it mattered. She paused. He would have reported it even if he'd known the risk. I believe that, Nikolas said. I know you do. She looked at him. That's not nothing. She stood, straightened. Move forward with this police, she said to Anastasiu. Give them everything. I want to be informed of each step. Of course. She walked out. In the hallway, she stopped, pressing her back against the wall, and breathed. Long, slow. The way you breathed when you were managing something that needed managing. In the distance, she could hear Theo's voice, some long, complicated narrative he was conducting for Maria's benefit, involving the elephant and a journey of some kind. She breathed. She thought about her father on a harbor dock in the November light, doing his job, finding the thing you found when you did your job well, making the call he would always have made. She thought about the ship, the company that had been her father's last case, becoming through the particular dark comedy of circumstances her son's family. She thought about the ways the world was connected underneath the invisible threads running between lives and events and decisions, the way you couldn't trace the full shape of anything until you stood far enough back, and even then, you only got part of it. She breathed. Then she went to find her son. Theo was in the playroom conducting the aforementioned journey with the elephant on a path made of stacked books, narrating in the focused, deeply serious tone he brought to all matters of import. He looked up when she came in and said, "Mama see Dumbo." The elephant's new name apparently was Dumbo. "Hello, Dumbo," Mara said. She sat on the floor. Theo climbed into her lap with the complete presumption of rightful ownership. She wrapped her arms around him and pressed her face into his curls and held on. He didn't ask why. He just leaned back against her and continued his narrative. Dumbo's journey continuing across the book road, and Mara sat on the floor of the compound playroom with her son in her arms and let the morning do what mornings did. She stayed until Nikolas found them. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She could feel him standing there before she looked up, and then he sat down on the floor beside them, which he did now without being asked. Without ceremony, with the naturalness of a man who had decided the floor was where he needed to be. Theo immediately incorporated him into the journey. Nikolas became, it appeared, the mountain. He accepted this role with the composure of a man who had run negotiations with the heads of organized crime operations and found that this was by comparison easier. Mara leaned her shoulder against his. He stayed where he was. The elephant crossed the mountain. Theo narrated each step with exhaustive detail. The November light came through the playroom windows in long, pale angles, and the day moved on. 3 nights later, something changed between them. It happened without announcement. That was the nature of the things that actually happened. She'd learned they didn't declare themselves. They accumulated one small thing, and then another, until there was enough of them that looking back you couldn't identify the precise moment. Only the fact. She'd been up late reading when she heard him in the hallway. She recognized his particular quality of movement. Unhurried, quiet. The specific rhythm of Nikolas Theron moving through a space that was familiar to him. She opened the door. He looked at her. The kind of look that had no strategy in it. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Neither could I." Neither of them moved for a moment. The hallway was lit only by the low overnight lamps, the compound quiet around them. From somewhere outside the distant movement of the harbor, a ship, probably the sound carrying in the November dark. She stepped back. He came in. They sat at first opposite ends of the window seat. In her sitting room, the city's lights visible below the compound walls, the coffee she'd made earlier still faintly warm. They talked. Not about anything strategic or structural or procedurally significant, about small things. His brother as a child, relentlessly sociable, dragging Nikolas into situations he hadn't planned for and from which he'd been unable to remove himself without causing scenes. Her father taking her to the harbor on Saturday mornings when she was young, the smell of salt and diesel, the way he'd explained the cargo manifest process to her 8-year-old self with the same thoroughness he gave everything. They talked for 2 hours. Then in the particular silence that followed the run of words, she reached for his hand. He looked at it. Then he turned it over and held it properly, the way you held something you didn't intend to put down. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I want to try," she said. "Not what we had before. Something new. Something we actually choose." "Yes," he said, without any calculation at all. Just the word. She moved toward him, and the night continued, and the harbor sounds carried through the dark, and somewhere in the jungle room, Theo slept with his elephant, and the November city was very quiet around the compound's careful walls, and inside them, 2 people who had been circling each other across 18 months of distance, and one very long series of difficult conversations finally closed the last of the space between them. December arrived. It arrived the way significant things arrived in Mara's experience, not dramatically, not with announcement, but with an accumulation of detail that added up to changed. The compound's lemon trees held their yellow fruit against the cold. The harbor beyond the walls ran gray. The compound staff put a wreath on the main building's door, which Theo found fascinating and repeatedly tried to dismantle. Mara noticed that she was no longer counting the days. This was worth noting. She'd been counting them since she arrived, a low-grade ongoing inventory of how long she'd been here. How long since the Glyphata apartment? How long since the phone call, in the dark? It was the habit of someone who had lived by careful accounting for a long time, and it had simply stopped. She noticed its absence on a Tuesday morning over coffee, when she realized she had no idea how many days it had been since the meeting with Vranas. She mentioned this to Nikolas. He was looking at a tablet with his morning coffee, half-focused, the kind of absorbed that wasn't quite present. He looked up. "What were you counting toward?" he asked. She thought about it. "I don't know. Some threshold." She paused. I think I was waiting to decide if I was staying. He set down the tablet. And I stopped waiting. She looked at him. At some point, I just started being here instead of waiting to decide if I was here. He held her gaze. Something in him settled. Good, he said. Quiet. She picked up her coffee. Theo came barreling in from the hallway with Maria in pursuit and a piece of the wreath in his hand, and the morning resumed its standard organized chaos. The call from the Serious Crimes Unit came on a Wednesday. Anastasia brought it to her directly, as he'd been doing, bypassing the usual security clearance choreography delivered straight to her sitting room with the speed of news that warranted speed. Pavlos Stavrianos had been taken into custody in Crete at 6 that morning. He'd been cooperative, according to the reporting officer, in the specific way of someone who had been running long enough that the running itself had become the problem. He'd confirmed the basic sequence of events, the flagged inspection, the call he'd received from a man whose name he'd withheld pending negotiation of terms, the decision to handle it, the crew member, the severance package, the exit. He was talking. Mara sat with this information for a long moment. The man he received the call from, she said. He's withholding the name. For now. His legal representation is negotiating. Anastasia's voice was careful. The investigators are confident he'll provide it within 48 hours. What does that mean for the case? It means we're one name away from closing the chain. Once we have the authorization source, the entire sequence is documentable and prosecutable. He paused. There's enough for a significant conviction. The harbor death charges will be the most serious, but there are also the sanctions violations, the obstruction, the payments. Another pause. Your father will be acknowledged. The inspection he was conducting will be formally validated. She looked at the wall. He was doing his job right, she said. Yes, Anastasia said, completely by the book. The documentation he'd already filed before he died was the foundation of the case against the subsidiary that Mr. Theron subsequently closed. She absorbed this, her father's last inspection. Filed, documented, entered into the record the way he'd entered everything into the record his entire career. Then his death and the investigation that should have happened and didn't, and the subsidiary that closed a year later for reasons Nikolas hadn't connected to anything, because he hadn't known there was anything to connect. The work had continued even after him, just not in time. Thank you, she said to Anastasia. Keep me updated. He left. She sat in the quiet for a few minutes. Then she went to find Nikolas. He was in the security room, which was where he went when he needed to think she'd learned the spatial habits of how he processed the way specific rooms served specific functions in his internal architecture. She knocked once and went in. He looked up. He read her face. They've got him, he said. In custody. He's talking. She sat in the chair across the work table. One name away from closing the chain. Nikolas nodded slowly. He was still for a moment. Then, your father's inspection. The documentation he filed. I know. It was used in the internal review that led to shutting down that subsidiary. I didn't connect it because it was flagged under a case reference I didn't recognize, and I was... He stopped. I was in the middle of a number of other things. I didn't pull the full history. You didn't know. No. But if I'd looked... Nikolas? She waited until he looked at her. You're not responsible for the decision someone made on your ship. You're responsible for the company that employed them. And you've held the company responsible. She paused. That's what accountability looks like. Not flagellation. Action. He held her gaze. My father would have had an opinion about that, she said. He was a practical man. He believed in what you did after the mistake, not how long you felt bad about the mistake. She looked at the work table. He would have respected what you're doing. Nikolas was quiet for a moment. You believe that? Yes. She looked up at him. I do. He nodded. Not relief, exactly. Something that didn't need to be named. The name's, he said, when we have it. When we have it, she agreed, we see it through completely. The name came on Friday. Mara was at the kitchen table with Theo when her phone buzzed. She looked at the message from Anastasiou. Read it twice. Set the phone face down. Theo was conducting a very serious banana assessment. She watched him for a moment. The name was someone she didn't know. Someone from the old Theron structure, a manager in the subsidiary that had since been closed, a man who had made a calculation 4 years ago about what was worth protecting and had been wrong in a way that had taken until now to catch up with him. He'd been located in Bulgaria. Extradition proceedings were beginning. Her father had died because of a decision made by someone protecting a business that didn't exist anymore. Protecting something that hadn't survived anyway. The particular futility of it. She picked up her phone and called Anastasiu back. The Bulgarian extradition, she said. What's the timeline? Months, realistically, possibly longer. But it's moving. Yes. Okay? She paused. Thank you for all of it. She put the phone down. Theo had finished the banana and was now regarding her with the focused assessment of a toddler, evaluating whether the current emotional climate warranted intervention. Mama, okay, he said. Yes, baby. She looked at him, his dark eyes, Nikolas's eyes, absolutely present and attentive, and not remotely strategic about it. Mama's okay. He nodded, climbed down from the chair, brought her the empty banana peel as an offering. She took it. Thank you. You're welcome, he said with the gravity of a person who has absorbed the correct social responses and applies them precisely. She laughed. It started as something small and became something larger. The kind of laugh that was adjacent to crying in the way that release sometimes was the kind that came when something had been held for too long and finally didn't need to be held anymore. Theo watched her with interest. Then he laughed too, because that was what Theo did. He followed joy like a compass bearing. Nikolas found them like that when he came in from the security room. Mara at the kitchen table laughing. Theo on the floor laughing, the banana peel on the table between them. He looked at the scene. Something crossed his face that she'd been seeing more often. The uncalculated thing, the thing he wasn't managing. He sat down across from her. It's done, she said, when she could say it. I know. Anastasiu called me. Both ways. He held her gaze. Both ways. She reached across the table. He took her hand. Theo from the floor announced that he also wanted to hold hands and positioned himself between them. One hand in each of theirs, completing the circuit with the absolute authority of someone who has identified what is needed and supplied it. They sat like that for a while. The December light came through the compound kitchen windows, low and clear, and outside the walls, the city moved through its ordinary Friday, and inside them, 3 people sat at a kitchen table, and the space around them felt for the first time completely still. They moved to the house 3 weeks before Christmas. It was not a dramatic move. Nikolas had spent the preceding weeks quietly, methodically preparing it, not alone this time, but with her. He'd asked about the kitchen, about the layout of Theo's room, about how much of the compound's security infrastructure was necessary to replicate versus how much was specific to a threat level that had now significantly decreased with the Vrana's agreement and the investigation's progress. He'd asked. That was the part she kept noting. He'd asked every time. The house was in a neighborhood north of Glyfada. Not the same suburb where she'd been hiding deliberately. Not that, but the same general register of ordinary. Wide street. Mature trees, houses with yards. The kind of street that had visible evidence of children in it. Bicycles, a basketball hoop, a chalk drawing on the pavement outside the house 2 doors down. The yard was exactly what she'd said Theo needed. She stood in it on the morning they arrived and watched Theo run in a straight line from the back door to the garden fence, turn around and run back, and then do it again apparently for the pure pleasure of unimpeded movement. He's going to do that for an hour, she said. Let him. Nikolas stood beside her, his hands in his coat pockets, watching. He'd arrived an hour before them to check the security setup, a lower-key version than the compound's proportionate to a post-Vranas agreement threat landscape, enough to be responsible without being a fortress. She'd looked at the setup with professional assessment. She'd approved it. They'd had that conversation together. Both of them, back and forth. You're doing it right, she said now. He glanced at her. The asking, she said. The conversations instead of decisions. You've been consistent. She looked at him. I notice. I want you to know I notice. He was quiet for a moment. It's easier than I thought it would be, he said. And harder. Both. That's about right. He looked at Theo. He's been doing the running thing since we left the compound. He does it when he's happy. He did it at the estate when Velis cleared him after the fever. He did it in the compound garden after the security alarm. Once he understood it was over, he ran laps. She watched her son. He processes joy kinetically. He processes everything kinetically, Nikolas said. He's been running since he could walk. She looked at him sideways. You sound proud of that. I am proud of that. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't have an audience. The kind that happened because of something real. He saw it. He smiled back, which was still something she hadn't entirely accustomed herself to. Nikolas's actual smile, the one that wasn't deployed, that wasn't part of the arsenal. It was rare and entirely without performance, and every time she saw it, she felt something warm move through her chest. Come on, she said. We should see the inside. The inside of the house was everything and nothing. Mara stood in the kitchen, which had a window over the sink that looked out at the yard, and thought about her Glyphata apartment with its single window that faced a concrete wall, and thought about the compound with its functional spaces and institutional sightlines, and felt the particular quality of a place that had been chosen for living rather than surviving or securing. The kitchen had a peninsula, space to sit at. She'd told him she wanted a kitchen with a place to sit, and she'd said it once in a conversation about something else, not as a request but as a thought. He'd noted it. She ran her hand along the counter. 3 bedrooms, he said from the doorway. The largest has a bathroom en suite. I thought we might... He stopped. She turned around. I thought, he said again with the particular carefulness of a man who had learned to ask, that we might share the largest room, if you want. A pause. If that's where we are. She looked at him. Is that where we are? She asked. He held her gaze. I hope so. She thought about the hallway conversation 3 weeks ago. The window seat at midnight. 2 hours of talking about things that weren't strategic or structural. His brother as a child. Her father at the harbor. She thought about waking up the following morning and finding that it had been neither a mistake nor a revelation, but simply a beginning, the kind you had to keep choosing. Yes, she said. That's where we are. He nodded. Something in him settled. Okay, he said. She turned back to the window over the sink, the view of the yard where Theo was still running. Andreas will have opinions about the guest room, she said. Andreas will arrive uninvited within 48 hours and rearrange the living room furniture while telling me he's just helping. You're describing someone who treats your house like his own. I've been trying to stop him for 30 years. I've made no progress. She laughed. Real easy, the laugh of someone who has finally arrived somewhere. Let him rearrange, she said. It's fine. She heard him move. Then he was behind her, his arms around her, looking over her shoulder at the yard at Theo, running his laps in the December grass. We could have a tree, he said. What? A Christmas tree. If you want one. I've never, the estate doesn't. He paused. I've never had one. I don't know if... Nikolas. She turned around inside his arms, looked at him. We're getting a tree. He looked back at her with the expression she'd come to understand as Nikolas Theron encountering something he hadn't known to want until it was offered. Okay, he said. A big one, she said. Theo will climb it. That seems problematic. It is. It's also part of it. She held his gaze. You have to let some things be slightly problematic. That's what living looks like. He thought about this. I can work with slightly problematic. Good. She turned back to the window. Outside, Theo had discovered something in the corner of the yard, a snail possibly, or a stone, or one of the 1,000 things that warranted intensive investigation when you were 18 months old and the world was still primarily inexplicable. He was crouched over it with both hands on his knees, examining it with the total focus he gave everything. He looks like you when he does that, she said. Nikolas looked. She felt him look, felt the particular quality of his attention when it was on Theo. The thing she'd been watching since the first night, that thing in him that had rearranged everything else in order of priority. He looks like you, Nikolas said. The focus, the going all the way in. She thought about this. Both of us, then. Both of us, he agreed. Theo looked up, saw them at the window. His face opened completely, the particular joy of finding the people you need where you expected them. The uncomplicated gladness of it. He waved both hands. They waved back. The December morning was very clear. The yard already casting shadows in its new light. The neighbor's garden fence with a string of early Christmas lights. Someone had put up already blinking in the pale midday, and the house settling around them in the way houses settled when people had arrived who intended to stay. Mara let out a long, slow breath. Come on, she said. Let's go see what he found. They went out together.
Nah.
The tree arrived on Saturday. Andreas delivered it personally in the back of a vehicle that was not designed for this purpose, with the cheerful disregard for practicality that was his signature mode of operating. He and Nikolas spent 45 minutes arguing about the stand while Mara sat on the kitchen floor with Theo and watched them with the particular pleasure of someone observing something that has been happening for 30 years and has not needed to change. You're holding it at the wrong angle, Andreas said. I'm holding it at the only angle that allows the trunk to reach the stand. The stand is crooked. The stand is mathematically perpendicular to the floor. The floor is slightly uneven. Then the tree is perfectly vertical, relative to gravity, which is the relevant standard. The relevant standard is whether it looks straight. Those should be the same thing. Mara leaned toward Theo. Your father and your uncle have been doing this since 1998, she said quietly. Theo watched them with the sober attention of someone studying a natural phenomenon. Again? He asked. Different tree, she said. Same argument, apparently. The tree went up eventually. Nicholas won on technicality. Andreas declared moral victory and went to find the box of ornaments Mara had bought at the market the previous Thursday. They decorated it that evening. Theo's contributions were concentrated heavily at the lower third the area within his reach, which ended up looking deliberately artistic in a way that it wasn't. Mara unwrapped paper ornaments she'd found in bright colors. Nothing valuable things Theo could handle without consequence. Nicholas hung them where directed with the grave precision of a man who was learning that the measure of a Christmas tree was not its technical execution, but whether the people around it were paying attention to each other. Andreas made mulled wine. Someone put on music. Theo danced in the living room with the complete physical commitment he brought to dancing, his arms moving without connection to the rhythm, his whole face intent. Nicholas stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. Mara found him there. Are you okay? She asked. Yes. He looked at the living room. Andreas had crouched down and was attempting to teach Theo a specific arm movement, which Theo was reproducing with approximately 40% accuracy and considerable enthusiasm. He stopped. She waited. I didn't know this was available, he said finally. I didn't know it was something that was possible for my life. He looked at her. I thought the life I was building I thought it was complete, that it was what it was going to be. She looked at him steadily. And now Theo is dancing to music in my living room and my brother is teaching him to wave his arms and you're standing next to me and it's... He stopped again. It's more than I knew how to ask for. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, don't let it be something you watch from the doorway. He looked at her. Go in, she said. You're allowed. He held her gaze. Then he moved. Theo saw him coming and lit up. He held out his arms as the universal toddler signal for up, and Nicholas picked him up without breaking stride and walked into the center of the living room. Andreas grinned and turned the music up. Mara stood in the doorway and watched the three of them. The man and his brother and his small dancing son in the living room of a house that smelled like pine and cinnamon and was slightly imperfectly lit by a Christmas tree that leaned 2 degrees off center in a stand that was definitely not uneven and felt something she'd been afraid to name settle into place. She walked in. Christmas was quiet by design. Her sister called from Melbourne in the morning. Elise talked to Theo for 15 minutes, which was as long as Theo's phone attention typically held, and cried a little when Mara told her about the house, the school nearby, the way Theo had started saying Dada with the same casual ownership he said Mama. I want to meet him, Elise said. Come in the spring, Mara said. We'll be ready for guests by then. After the call, she found Nikolas in the kitchen making coffee. He'd been up earlier than her. She'd heard him at 6, the particular quality of movement of someone who woke early out of habit and was trying to do it quietly. She wants to come in spring, Mara said. Good. He poured her coffee without asking. I'll make sure the guest room is ready. Andreas won't have arranged it yet. He'll have arranged it 4 times by spring. We'll have it back to something functional. She sat at the kitchen counter. He sat on the other side of the peninsula, the place she'd told him once in passing she'd wanted. She watched him over the rim of her coffee cup. I have something for you, she said. He looked at her. She'd thought about this for 2 weeks. Had not found a way to make it formal or ceremonial, which was appropriate. Formal and ceremonial were not the register of the thing she was trying to give him. She'd found the right format the previous Wednesday, a small book, leather-bound, the kind with thick cream pages. She'd spent 4 evenings filling the first dozen pages with photographs printed at a local shop. Some handwritten notes, dates she could remember, dates she could only approximate. She pushed it across the counter. He looked at it, looked at her. Open it, she said. He opened it. The first page, Theo, at approximately 4 weeks old. A clinic photograph she'd had taken in Thessaloniki, his face still red and new and completely astonished by the world. Below it, in her handwriting, Theo Calloway Theron, January 14th, 7 pounds 6 ounces. First thing he did was yell. She watched Nikolas's face as he turned the pages. The smile at 4 months, a photograph taken in a Thessaloniki Park Theo in a carrier against Mara's chest, the first smile that was definitely a smile. The first time sitting without support, Theo's expression one of furious concentration. First solid food sweet potato, which he'd greeted with outrage. First steps, a blurry phone video. She'd screenshotted Theo's arms out for balance, his face somewhere between terrified and triumphant. Nikolas turned the pages slowly. When he reached the last filled page, he stopped. He didn't close the book. "There are more pages," she said. "I left them blank." He looked up. "Because I only have one side of the story," she said. "The first 18 months, and I know that doesn't give you the time back. Nothing does that." She held his gaze. "But the rest of the pages are yours to fill too. Ours. From now." He looked at her for a long moment. His expression was doing the unguarded thing, the crack in the control, and this time it stayed open longer than usual, long enough for her to see what was there. "Thank you," he said, very quiet. "Merry Christmas," she said. From upstairs, Theo's voice, "Mama Dada, Dumbo, ready for tree." Nikolas looked at the ceiling. "Dumbo needs to see the tree." Apparently Dumbo didn't see the tree properly last night. Dumbo was asleep before the tree was finished. Dumbo has grievances. He closed the book, held it for a moment, then he stood. "We should go see the tree," he said. "We should," she agreed. They went upstairs together to retrieve Theo and Dumbo and came back down to stand in front of the slightly off-center Christmas tree in the living room with the toddler curated lower third, and Theo held up the elephant and showed it the tree, very carefully narrating in the serious, detailed way he narrated everything, and the morning light came through the front window in long December angles and lay across the room in warm, unhurried bands. Nikolas stood behind her. His arm was around her shoulders. She leaned back against him. "He's explaining the ornaments," she said quietly. "He's explaining all of them, systematically. He gets that from you." He looked at her, the edge of his mouth curved. "Probably." The tree blinked. Theo moved on to the next ornament. Outside, the street was quiet and cold, and the neighbors' lights were still doing their blinking two-beat rhythm. Mara stood in her house on Christmas morning with her son and the man she'd run from and run back to, and felt without having to search for it, without having to construct it out of effort and intention, something she recognized. Home, not perfect. Not without its complications, its ongoing negotiations, the investigation still moving through the justice system, Nikolas still learning the daily practice of choosing conversation over control, her own ongoing reconstruction of what safety looked like when it wasn't something you'd decided for yourself alone. But home, the specific, imperfect, inhabited kind. January brought a specific kind of quiet. The investigation moved. Extradition proceedings advanced through bureaucratic stages with the grinding inevitability of legal process. Anastasiou sent weekly updates. The case was solid. Stavrianos' testimony, the financial transfer records, the camera evidence, the crew member, whose inconsistent statement was now corroborated by the full picture. The man in Bulgaria was no longer simply sought, but formally charged. His legal team was operating the way legal teams operated when the evidence was substantial and the options were limited. Mara read each update and filed them and moved on. She'd learned that she couldn't hold the investigation in the front of her mind while simultaneously building the life that was the reason for holding it accountable. The two things required different kinds of attention, and she was learning to switch between them without letting one consume the other. She was also learning to sleep past 6, which had not been possible for the first month in the house, but was becoming progressively more achievable as the low-grade vigilance of the previous 18 months slowly finally subsided. One morning, she woke to find it was 7:15, and the house was not quiet. She could hear Nikolas and Theo downstairs, the particular music of that combination, Nikolas's measured responses and Theo's full-body engagement with everything. She lay still for a moment and listened. "And the big elephant goes here," Theo was saying. "That seems right," Nikolas said. "What about the small one?" No small one," Theo said with authority. "There isn't one. You're right. Big elephant is best." Objectively, she closed her eyes. Opened them. The morning light through the curtains was pale and clean. The house smelled of coffee. She stayed in bed for another 3 minutes, which was the longest she'd allowed herself since November. Then she got up. Nikolas looked up when she appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had coffee ready. Theo had Dumbo positioned on the kitchen counter, watching him eat toast with the focused supervisory interest of a stuffed elephant with strong opinions. "You slept," Nikolas said. 7:15. 7:15, he agreed. Something in his expression, careful, noted something he didn't make a speech out of. She took the coffee. "Thank you. Thank you for letting us handle the morning." She sat on her side of the peninsula. looked at Theo, who was now holding a piece of toast out to Dumbo with the explanatory patience of a person accustomed to educating others. "You're good at the morning," she said. "We have a system." "What's the system?" "I make the toast. Theo makes the decisions about everything else." She looked at him. He looked back. The edge of his mouth moved. She was thinking, not for the first time, that the kitchen, the toast, the elephant with opinions, the coffee, exactly right. The man across the counter learning to be someone she could count on was worth the 18 months. Not instead of them. Not as replacement for what they'd cost, but alongside. The thing she'd found on the other side. Worth having arrived at even by the route she'd taken. She picked up her coffee. "I'm going to call the hospital in Glyphada today," she said, "about the position." He was very still for a moment. Then he said evenly, "Okay. Dax is going to want to brief me on transport protocols." "He has a presentation prepared," Nikolas said. "He's been waiting for you to say you're ready." She looked at him. "You knew I was going to say it. I knew you were close. And you didn't push. I was working on not pushing." She held his gaze. "How was that?" "Hard," he said. "Very." She almost smiled. "Thank you." "Don't thank me for doing the thing I should be doing." "Then thank you for doing it even though it's hard." He held her gaze. "Always," he said. And she believed it. Theo announced that Dumbo was finished with the toast. Nikolas produced a banana. Theo reviewed it with appropriate solemnity and accepted. The January morning moved on. The hospital interview was on a Tuesday. Mara drove herself. She was aware a detail that wouldn't register to most people. She drove herself. She had a car registered legitimate in her actual name, and she got in it with her bag and her credentials and the specific clarity of a person who has spent a year and a half without agency and understands exactly what it means to have it back. And she drove to a hospital in Glyphada and parked and walked in. The security briefing Dax had given her was thorough and practical, and had not to his credit been presented as a reason not to go. It had been presented as information for making the trip safely. That difference mattered. Nikolas had said goodbye at the front door that morning without making it a significant moment, which she suspected had cost him something and which she appreciated more than she would have said. The interview lasted 90 minutes. The head of department, Dr. Efthymiou, was direct and substantive. She asked about the gap in Mara's employment history. Mara said she'd taken time out to have her son and was ready to return. Dr. Efthymiou nodded and moved on as a good interviewer did. They discussed triage protocols, Mara's experience in high-acuity settings, the specific rhythms of a busy urban ER. Mara felt the nursing part of her brain coming fully awake, switching on with the clean precision of something that had been waiting for the conditions to be right. She drove home with the offer letter in her bag. 3 12-hour shifts per week, starting the following month. Nikolas was at the kitchen table when she came in. He looked up, read her face. "You got it," he said. "I got it." He stood, crossed to her, put his hands on her face, tilted it up, and kissed her once, simply. "Good," he said. "That's exactly right." She looked at him. "You're not worried." "I'm worried every time you leave the house," he said. "I'm managing the worry because the alternative is not something I'm willing to build our life around." He held her gaze. "I told you I was working on it. I'm still working on it." She held his gaze. "I know." She paused. "And I know it's not nothing." "It's not nothing." Theo appeared from the living room, registered that Mama was home, and ran the full length of the hall to reach her in the way he ran every distance now, without holding back, without reservation, with the complete physical confidence of someone who had always been caught. She caught him. "How was your day?" she asked. "Dada made eggs," Theo said. "How were they?" "Too round," Theo said with deep seriousness. She looked over his head at Nikolas. He raised an eyebrow. "I'll work on the shape," he said. The afternoon continued. It was ordinary in the specific, invaluable way that things were ordinary when they had been hard-won, not dramatic, not significant. Just the sustained ordinary of people who had found their way to each other and were staying there. Mara thought about this later after Theo was asleep and the house was quiet. She thought about the phone call in the dark of the Glyphada apartment, the way her hand had shaken, the way she'd dialed and then stood at the edge of everything she'd run from and chosen to walk back in. She thought about her father at the harbor, about the work he'd done that had continued even after him, about the way the world connected things underground beneath the visible surface, and how you didn't always understand the connections until you were ready to. She thought about Nikolas asleep beside her, his hand near hers in the way he had now not claiming present. She thought, "I'm glad I called." Not just because of Theo, though, that was everything. Not just because Nicholas had turned out to be more than the version of him she'd run from, though that was also everything. Because she had been afraid and she had called anyway, and on the other side of the call, something had been possible that wasn't possible before. That was the thing she kept coming back to, not the absence of fear, the presence of something stronger. She looked at the ceiling of the house she lived in. She was glad she had called. There was one conversation still waiting. She'd known it since the compound, since the garden maybe earlier, since the night in the hallway when she'd stepped back and he'd come in and something had been established that hadn't been named. She raised it on a Sunday. They were in the living room after Theo was down. The Christmas tree had come down in early January, but the lights Andreas had strung along the mantel were still there, blinking in the evening rhythm. Mara had a book she wasn't reading. Nicholas had a tablet he wasn't looking at. "I need to ask you something," she said. He looked up. "I've been thinking about what we're doing," she said. "You and me. Whether we've actually said it out loud." He set the tablet down, gave her his full attention. "I know what I feel," she said carefully. "I've known for a while. I was afraid of it for a long time, and then I stopped being afraid, and I've just been here. With you. Without saying it." She held his gaze. "I love you." The room was quiet. "Not the version of you I remembered from before," she said. "Not the version I built to run from. This version. The one in this house. The one on the kitchen floor with Theo. The one who opened the investigation." She paused. "The one who is learning to ask instead of decide." He looked at her steadily. The unguarded thing again, the crack where the real thing came through. "I love you," he said. Yes. I've known since you stood in that warehouse in Piraeus and told Vranas you'd stopped running." A pause. "Since before that, probably. I'm not good at accounting for when things began." She looked at him. "You could have said it first. I was waiting for you to be sure." "I'm sure." "I know," he said. "I've known you were sure for about 3 weeks." She looked at him. "And you waited?" "I wanted it to be yours first." He held her gaze. "I'd been making enough decisions without asking. I was trying to give you the things that should be yours." She looked at him for a long moment. "Nicholas," she said. Come here." He came here. The evening lights blinked on the mantel. The street outside was very quiet the January Sunday, settling into its dark. Somewhere upstairs, Theo slept with Dumbo, oblivious and perfect. Mara sat in the living room of her house and held on to the man she loved and felt down to the center of it that this was where the story had been heading all along. Not easily, not without cost, but with the particular stubborn inevitability of things that are supposed to happen. She held on. He held back. The lights blinked. The night moved on. The trial date was set for March. Not the Bulgarian extradition that was still moving through its particular bureaucratic labyrinth, slower and more certain than any of them would have chosen, but the domestic proceedings against Pavlos Stavrianos, who had chosen cooperation over resistance, and was now providing the testimony that would build the case against the man who had authorized the decision in the first place. Mara tracked the court calendar the way she tracked her shifts at Glyphata General, practically without excessive emotion, noting the dates and planning around them. Dr. Efthymiou had been accommodating when she'd explained that she had a legal matter requiring her presence on specific dates. She had not explained more. Dr. Efthymiou had not asked more. She had been working for 6 weeks. The first shift back had been something she hadn't anticipated. Not difficult, not stressful, but overwhelming, in the specific way of returning to something essential. She'd walked into the ER, and the noise and the smell and the particular organized urgency of it had landed in her chest like a sound she'd been hearing at a distance for a long time, suddenly arriving at full volume. She'd stood at the nurse's station for 3 seconds before she moved, and then she'd moved with the muscle memory of 11 years and hadn't stopped until the end of the shift. She'd called Nicholas from the car in the hospital parking lot at the end of it. "Tell me," he'd said. "I forgot how much I love it," she said. "I forgot I'd been living so carefully for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be useful in the way you're trained to be useful." "Good." "Very." She'd looked at the hospital's lit entrance. "Very, very good." Dax's transport protocols had been followed exactly and had felt within 2 weeks like background rather than foreground. She came and went. She was a nurse in Glyphata. She was also Nikolas Theron's partner and Theo Theron's mother, and a person whose father's case was moving through the courts. These things coexisted without canceling each other. February moved quickly, the way months moved when you were inside a life rather than waiting to join one. Theo started a program. 3 mornings a week, a play group near the house, 12 other children, a woman named Kyria Lamprini, who had been running early childhood programs in the neighborhood for 20 years and who assessed Theo in the first 5 minutes with the accuracy of long practice. He's very verbal, she told Mara, and very physical, and very certain about his own authority. Yes, Mara said. It's wonderful, Kyria Lamprini said, as if Mara had been concerned. Nikolas attended the first morning drop-off. He stood at the edge of the playgroup room in his jacket and watched 12 toddlers navigate each other's existence, and his expression was the particular one of a man encountering a scale of chaos he had not previously had cause to model. This is what most mornings look like, Mara told him, for most parents. And they do this voluntarily. They pay to do this. It's considered beneficial. He watched a child walk directly into a wall for no apparent reason, recover without distress, and walk away. He's fine, Mara said before he could assess it as a threat. Theo, meanwhile, had identified a boy named Petros, who shared his conviction that everything could be improved by running, and they were currently running in a circle together with the synchronicity of people who have immediately recognized each other as their kind. He's made a friend, Nikolas said. He makes friends everywhere. He made friends with the produce vendor at the market last week. I know, the man still waves at us from across the street. Mara looked at Theo, running laughing, his face completely open, the face he made when the world was exactly the right size. He's going to be okay, she said. Whatever happened before, wherever we started, he's going to be okay. Nikolas stood beside her. He's more than okay. He is, she agreed. But I needed to say it. She looked at Nikolas. I spent a long time being afraid of what my choices would cost him. I needed to say out loud that it didn't. He held her gaze. He has 2 parents who love him. He has a house and a yard. He has an uncle who arrives uninvited and teaches him coin tricks. He paused. He has Dumbo. He has Dumbo, she agreed, which might be the most important one. He smiled. The real one. She leaned into his shoulder briefly, the way she did now. The casual intimacy of people who have stopped being careful about the small things because they've found the small things are how you build the large ones. He put his arm around her. They watched Theo run. The first day of the Stavrianos trial was gray and cold. The courthouse was in central Athens. Mara arrived with Anastasiou. Nikolas had offered to come. She'd said she'd ask him if she needed him there, which they both understood meant she needed to do the first day herself. Anastasiou was sufficient company. He was steady and informative without being managing, and she appreciated that about him. She sat in the gallery. She had expected the courtroom to feel significant. It felt administrative. Legal proceedings moved with the particular plodding formality of systems designed for deliberateness, not drama. And she found herself grateful for that. Grateful that her father's death was being treated as a matter of evidence and procedure rather than performance. He would have approved of that. Stavrianos was smaller than she'd imagined. Compact gray in the face of a man who had spent the intervening years knowing this moment was coming. He did not look at the gallery. She did not look away from him. The charge was read: conspiracy to commit homicide, obstruction of a Port Authority investigation, financial crimes related to the illegal cargo and the cover-up. The proceedings were adjourned after 3 hours for scheduling. She walked out. On the courthouse steps, she took out her phone and called Nikolas. First day, she said. How was it? Hard. She paused. Good. Necessary. She looked at the street. It's real. I knew it was real, but seeing it as a legal proceeding with evidence and testimony and formal language makes it real in a different way. Different how? She thought about this. More resolved somehow, like it has a shape now. Before it was just a fact I was carrying. Now it's a thing with a beginning and a middle and an end. He was quiet for a moment. Are you coming home? In an hour. She paused. Is Theo awake from his nap? He's been awake for 40 minutes. He's currently explaining to Dumbo the structure of the courthouse, which I described to him when you left. She stood still for a moment. You described the courthouse to him this morning. He asked where you were going. I thought he deserved an actual answer. She looked at the courthouse behind her, then at the street, then at the sky, which had gone from gray to the particular pale blue that happened in Athens in winter when the light caught it right. Thank you, she said, for telling a toddler about courthouses, for taking him seriously. A pause. He's serious people, Nikolas said. He deserves to be taken seriously. She breathed. An hour, she said. We'll be here, he said. She put her phone in her pocket and went to find the car. The verdict in the Stavrianos proceeding came in April. Guilty on all charges. She heard it from Anastasiou, who called at noon, and she was at the kitchen counter eating lunch. And she put the phone down on the counter and sat with it for a long moment, just breathing. Guilty. All charges. Her father had been killed by a decision made to protect a shipment that hadn't survived the following year anyway, made by a man who had calculated that it was worth it. And now a court had formally, publicly, as a matter of record, said that it was not worth it, and that the decision had consequences. She thought about her father, about Saturday mornings at the harbor, about the way he'd explained cargo manifests to an 8-year-old with the same seriousness he brought to everything, about the inspection documents that had been filed properly in perfect order right up until the moment he hadn't been there to file them anymore. She sat with it. Then she called Nikolas. He answered immediately. She didn't say anything for a moment. Mara, guilty, she said. All charges. Silence. He's going to appeal, she said. Anastasiou says there will be an appeal, and the Bulgarian extradition is still moving. It's not over. No, but it's documented now, what they did, what he was. It's a matter of public record that my father died because someone made a decision and it was wrong. She paused. He was right. The inspection was right. The record shows it. Nikolas was very quiet on the line. He was right, she said again. And she heard in her own voice the things she hadn't let herself feel until now. The grief of it. The uncomplicated grief of a daughter who had needed to hear that her father had done the right thing and had finally been given by a court of law the formal confirmation of what she'd already known. He was right, Nikolas said, steady, completely right, and it's on the record. She pressed her fingers against her eyes. Thank you, she said, for the investigation, for not hiding it, for giving me this. You gave yourself this, he said. You asked for it. You didn't let it go. She said. We didn't let it go. A pause. He agreed. She sat at the kitchen counter until she stopped shaking. Then she got up and washed her hands and got her bag and drove to the playgroup to pick up Theo early because she needed to hold him. She arrived mid-morning. Kyria Lamprini looked at her face and said nothing. Simply walked her to the room where Theo was constructing something ambitious with blocks. He looked up, registered her, stood immediately. Mama, he said, with authority. As if her arrival at this unusual hour was not unexpected, but exactly correct. She crouched down. He walked to her and put his arms around her neck, and she held him in the middle of the playgroup room with 12 toddlers constructing things around them, and the smell of crayons and wood, and the specific warm weight of her son. I love you, she said into his curls. Love you, he said, easily, automatically, the way he said it, without calculation, without condition, with the complete simplicity of someone who has always known it and finds it unremarkable precisely because it is everything. She held on for another moment. Then she set him down. Finish your blocks, she said. He returned to his construction with the focused urgency of a person for whom an interruption is complete once addressed. And Mara sat on one of the small chairs at the edge of the room and watched him build, and the morning moved around them, and somewhere across the city the record existed. Spring came to Athens the way it always did, fast, the way good things moved there, almost impatient. The yard behind the house became possible again. Theo spent every afternoon in it running his distance assessments, discovering the garden's population of beetles and snails, and the occasional lizard that required intensive documentation. Mara put in a small raised bed on the south wall. Nothing ambitious. Tomatoes, herbs, things she'd grown in one form or another since her first apartment in her 20s, and had missed in the years of small rentals without outdoor space. She was putting in basil seedlings on a Saturday afternoon when Nikolas appeared at the back door. She looked up. His expression was doing something specific. Not alarmed, not guarded, something else. What? She said. Come inside when you're done. He paused. I have something to ask you. She looked at him for a moment. His face held. She turned back to the seedlings. She took her time. She knew what she was going to say. She'd known for a while. She'd been waiting for him to catch up to it, not because she needed the question, but because she wanted it to be his fully, because he deserved to be the one who asked. She finished the row, cleaned her hands on her jeans, stood up. Theo was occupied with something at the garden fence, narrating under his breath. She left him to it and went inside. Nikolas was standing in the kitchen. He had a cup of tea ready, which was her Saturday afternoon habit, and which he'd noted and maintained without comment for months. She picked it up. He looked at her. I'm not good at speeches, he said. I know. I'm better at actions. You've told me that and you're right. He paused. But I want to say something. With words. Because I think this deserves words. She waited. I was someone who'd stopped expecting my life to be full. The way it is now. He looked at her steadily. You brought Theo into the world, and you kept him safe when I couldn't have, and you called me when you needed help, and you didn't run again, even when it would have been easier. And every version of those decisions took something from you, and you made them anyway. He paused. I want to spend the rest of my life being the kind of person who deserves those decisions. She held his gaze. I want us to be a family, he said. Formally. Officially. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a ring. Simple. A single stone. The kind of thing that didn't perform, that was chosen rather than displayed. I want to ask you, and if you need more time, if you need whatever you need, tell me. But I want to ask. She looked at the ring, then at him. Ask me, she said. Will you marry me? He said. Mara Calloway. She looked at him for a long moment. Across the kitchen window, she could see Theo at the garden fence still narrating his discoveries, the afternoon sun on his dark curls. She thought about the Glyphata apartment, the shaking hands, the phone call into the dark. She thought about a man who had learned to ask instead of decide, who had opened an investigation into his own company's past, who had put a folder on a table and waited for her to read it, who had sat on a kitchen floor with blocks and been the mountain and learned the morning system and described the courthouse to a toddler. She thought about her father at the harbor, about work done right continuing even after the person who did it was gone. She thought about Theo running the fence line, absolutely certain he would always be caught. She thought about home, the imperfect, inhabited, chosen kind. Yes, she said. He slid the ring onto her finger. She looked at it, then at him. Then she laughed, the real one, the full one, and he pulled her toward him, and she went, and in the yard outside the window, Theo had turned from the fence and was running toward the back door because he'd heard the laugh and wanted to be wherever the laugh was, which was how he'd always been, his compass tuned to the people he loved. The door banged open. Theo arrived into the kitchen like weather. He looked at them, looked at Mara's hand, looked at the ring with the profound assessment of a person who evaluates everything. Shiny, he announced. Very, Mara said. He looked at Nikolas. Dada shiny. It's for Mama, Nikolas said. Theo appeared to consider whether this was satisfactory. Then he climbed Nikolas's leg with the efficiency of long practice and was hauled up onto his hip and looked at the ring from the improved vantage point and then looked at Mara with his father's dark eyes wide open, missing nothing. Good, he said, checking, making sure. Good, Mara said. Very good. He nodded. He put his arm around Nikolas's neck and leaned his head against his father's temple and regarded the kitchen with the satisfaction of a person who has correctly assessed a situation. More snail, he said then, because the garden was still waiting. Yes, Nikolas said, more snail. He looked at Mara over Theo's head. She looked back at him. There was nothing else needed. No more words, no more accounting, no more negotiating the space between them. The space had closed. Not perfectly, there were still things moving through courts. A man in Bulgaria appeals to be filed and answered, the ongoing work of building something together that worked for both of them. The daily practice of choosing partnership over control, the daily practice of choosing trust over running. There would always be work. That was what it meant to be alive in something real. But the space between them had closed. And in the kitchen of the house, with the yard and the tomatoes and the garden fence and the snails with the ring on her finger and her son on his hip, Mara Calloway stood in the life she'd been afraid to want and let herself have it completely. The summer was full. Elise came from Melbourne in June. She was smaller than Mara remembered, or the apartment was larger, or maybe it was just the particular way of seeing people differently when you were standing in your own life clearly. They sat in the yard on the first evening, Theo asleep upstairs, the summer warmth still in the air, and talked the way sisters talked when they'd been afraid they wouldn't talk again. You look different, Elise said. I am different. Good different. Mara looked at the yard. The raised beds, the tomatoes doing better than expected. The garden fence with its snail economy that Theo had been monitoring for 3 months. Yes, she said. Good different. Andreas organized a dinner. This was the kind of thing Andreas did without being asked, with the same cheerful insubordination he brought to furniture rearrangement and uninvited arrivals and the teaching of coin tricks to people who couldn't reliably keep secrets. He invited Elise, who he'd apparently decided was going to find him charming before he'd met her. And who did which, he accepted as his natural due. Nikolas watched his brother work the table with the expression of a man who had made peace with something that could not be changed. 23 years, he said to Mara quietly, watching Andreas make Elise laugh at something that Nikolas had no doubt was extremely flattering to Andreas specifically. 23 years of what, Mara said, of being very good at rooms since he was 8. There's been no change and I no longer expect one. Mara looked at Andreas, then at Nikolas. I notice you never actually try to stop him. Trying to stop him is exhausting. Letting him run expends his energy on everyone else and leaves me in peace. That's very strategic. I have my moments. She leaned against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. Across the table, Theo had abandoned his chair and installed himself in Elise's lap, where he was conducting a detailed inspection of her earrings, and Elise was holding very still with the expression of someone who has just understood what people mean when they say a child took to them. She's good with him, Nikolas said. She's wanted to meet him for 18 months, Mara said. She's been patient. Patience is underrated. Says the man who waited 3 weeks to tell me he loved me after he'd figured it out. That was strategy. It was patience. He looked at her, the edge of his mouth. Both. She smiled. Dinner continued. Theo transferred from Elise to the floor where he ran 3 circuits of the table before Andreas caught him and performed the coin trick, which never got old. Nikolas poured wine. The summer evening settled over the yard through the open doors the jasmine someone had planted against the fence, releasing into the warm air, and the house held its people with the ease of a place that has gotten used to being full. The extradition was completed in September. The man from Bulgaria arrived in Athens to face charges, and the case that had started with a harbor inspector's careful documentation and continued through an internal investigation and a domestic trial was now formally complete in its structure. There would be more proceedings, there would be appeals and delays, and the grinding mechanisms of justice that had no interest in narrative satisfaction. But the architecture was in place. The truth was on the record. Mara attended the arraignment with Nikolas. They sat in the gallery together. She held his hand and he held hers, and the charges were read, and the record grew another page. Afterward, they walked along the harbor front in the September evening. It was warm still, the light going golden over the Aegean, the harbor moving in its slow, constant patterns, ships arriving and departing, the infrastructure of commerce doing what it did, indifferent and necessary. Her father had loved this harbor. She'd known that from his stories, from the way he'd talked about it on Saturday mornings when she was small. He'd believed in it, in the work of keeping it honest, in the small, unglamorous accountability of showing up and checking the manifests and writing the reports. She looked at the water. He did good work, Nikolas said. She turned. He was looking at the harbor too. Yes, she said. The inspection he filed, the documentation. It's what allowed the subsidiary to be closed cleanly without anyone being able to claim the evidence was insufficient. He paused. The thing he was doing right up until the end was the thing that mattered. She looked at the Aegean. Its particular blue, deep and permanent, unconcerned with the specific dramas of the people who built their lives along its edges. He would have kept doing it, she said. He would have filed every report in perfect order until the day he retired. That's who he was. I know. Nikolas looked at her. I think you're who he was too. In a different register. She turned that over. Nurses and harbor inspectors. People who show up, he said, and do the work right, even when there's no reason to expect it matters. He paused. Even when the system around them isn't as clean as the work they're doing. She looked at him. You showed up, he said, to all of it. The calling, the coming back, the compound, the investigation, the courthouse. You showed up and did the work of it, even when the work was harder than it should have been. She was quiet for a moment. So did you. I had more to make up for. Yes, she said. And you made it up. She held his gaze. You made it up, Nikolas. He nodded, looked at the harbor. She took his hand again. They stood at the water's edge in the September evening and let the harbor do what it did. And after a while, they walked back to the car and drove home through Athens in the last of the light, the city arranging itself around them in its layered, ongoing 3,000-year way. Theo was awake when they got home, which he was not supposed to be, and Maria was in the process of negotiating a second story with him, which was the usual third-act move. He saw Mara and Nikolas from the top of the stairs and shouted with the whole-body joy of someone who has been waiting and is now validated. You're supposed to be asleep, Mara said. Story, Theo said. A counter-argument. You had a story. More story. Nikolas had already reached the top of the stairs. He picked Theo up, looked at Maria. "One more," he said. "Then sleep." Maria retreated with the dignity of a woman who has been extricated from a difficult negotiation. Nikolas carried Theo to his jungle room. Mara followed. They sat on the edge of the bed with their son between them. The elephant room, the mural, the big lion on the center wall with his resting authority. And Nikolas told a story about a lion who was also a harbor inspector, which was not a thing Mara had anticipated, but which Theo accepted without confusion as a reasonable premise, and which became over the following 20 minutes an adventure involving a cargo manifest, a very suspicious snail, and a resolution that satisfied everyone. Theo was asleep before the snail's motives were fully established. Nikolas looked at Mara over his son's sleeping head. She looked back at him. "A harbor inspector lion," she said quietly. "He seemed like a lion," he said. "Your father." She looked at the mural. The lion on the wall resting enormous, benevolent. The day Theo had walked in and pointed at it and said big as if he already knew. "Yes," she said. "He did." She reached past Theo's sleeping form and took Nikolas's hand. He turned it over and held it the way he always did, the grip that was careful and firm, and said, "I'm not putting this down." They stayed until they were sure Theo was fully under. Then they stood careful and quiet and walked out into the hallway and closed the door softly behind them. The house was still. Somewhere in the city, the harbor moved container ships crossing the dark Aegean, the lights of the port casting long reflections across the water, the whole enormous machinery of movement and commerce doing what it had always done. In a house north of Glyfada, on a quiet street with mature trees and a neighbor's basketball hoop and chalk drawings on the pavement, a woman who had spent 18 months running stood in a hallway with the man she'd come back to and felt the full weight of the life she'd chosen. It was heavy. It was supposed to be heavy. The light things didn't last. She turned toward him. He was already looking at her. "Come on," she said. They went down the hall together into the quiet of a house that knew them toward the rest of everything that was theirs. The wedding was in October, not a large one. Not the kind of event that the Theron name might have suggested. No grand venue, no cascade of obligation, no performance of power dressed as celebration. Nikolas had asked what she wanted, and she'd said small, and he'd said good, and that had been the entirety of the negotiation. 30 people. The house and its yard strung with lights that Andreas had installed over 2 days with the focused enthusiasm of a man who had found a task that suited him exactly. Tables in the garden, the October air warm enough still for it, the harbor visible in the distance if you stood at the right angle near the fence. Elise had come back from Melbourne. She stood next to Mara through all of it, with the specific quality of presence that only sisters had close enough to hand over something you'd forgotten. Steady enough that you could stop managing your own face for a moment and just be there. Kyria Lamprini attended. The hospital colleague Mara had made friends with over shared shifts. Anastasiu, who had brought his wife and sat in the second row with the contained dignity of a man who takes pride in good work without needing it, acknowledged. Dax, who had not been expected to come and had come anyway, standing at the edge of the proceedings with his characteristic stillness, and who Mara suspected had been instructed very firmly by Nikolas not to conduct a security sweep of the garden, and had found a compromise. Theo wore a suit. He had strong objections to the jacket, but was persuaded by the information that the jacket had pockets, after which the jacket became acceptable. He served as effectively the master of ceremonies in the sense that he moved through the proceedings with complete propriety and then completely abandoned all propriety when something interested him more, and the rhythm of the afternoon organized itself around his attention the way everything organized itself around Theo's attention. The ceremony itself was brief. A judge legal language, the kind of vows that said what needed to be said without decoration. She and Nikolas stood across from each other, and she looked at his face controlled, as it usually was. And beneath the control, that other thing, the real thing, the thing she'd learned to read. And when the moment came, she said yes, with the certainty of a person who has done the calculation many times and arrived at the same answer every time. He said it too, his voice even steady entirely himself. The ring was already on her finger. He'd given her that months ago. This was the paperwork, the formal record, the thing that would show up in official documents as evidence that it was real. She thought about her father as they signed the register, about records, about the significance of what was written down. This was written down now. This was on the record. Afterward in the yard, under the lights with the harbor visible and the jasmine still giving its last of the season into the evening air. She stood with a glass in her hand and looked at the life she'd assembled. The sister and the brother-in-law and the friend and the investigator and the security chief and the 12 people she'd accumulated in the specific way you accumulated people when you stopped running and started arriving places and felt it as a weight she was glad to carry. Nicholas appeared at her elbow. Not dramatically, just there. "Are you all right?" he said. She looked at the yard, at Theo, who had removed the jacket and was conducting Andreas in some game whose rules only Theo fully understood, at Elise laughing at something with Kyria Lamprini, at Dax, who had eaten 2 slices of cake and was pretending not to be pleased about it. "Yes," she said. He looked where she was looking. "All of it," she said. "This is all of it." He understood what she meant. He always did eventually. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him. Theo noticed. He changed course mid-game and crossed the yard toward them with his usual directness, ending up between them with his arms out, which was the signal for lifting, which was answered without discussion, which resulted in Theo installed on Nicholas's hip, looking out at the yard with the satisfaction of a person who has put himself in exactly the right place. "Good party," Theo said. "Very good party," Nicholas agreed. "More cake. We'll see." Theo took this under advisement. Then he looked at Mara with the specific quality of attention he'd had since before he could walk, the look that missed nothing, the look that knew her completely. "Mama happy," he said. She looked at her son, at the yard, at the life around her imperfect and inhabited and fully completely hers. "Mama happy," she said. He nodded once. The matter settled to his satisfaction. He turned back to the party. The October evening deepened around them, and the lights in the yard made gold of everything they touched, and the harbor lay dark and constant beyond the fence. And Mara Calloway. Mara Theron on paper. On the record as of today, stood in her yard on her wedding evening with her husband and her son, and felt without apology, without qualification, without the low background frequency of flight that had lived in her chest for so long, she'd thought it was just the sound she made. She felt home, completely, fully, without reservation. The way the word had always meant before she'd learned to be afraid of it. She held her son. She held her husband's hand. The party went on around them, and the night came in, and the harbor lights came up. And somewhere in the city, the record of everything that had happened, all of it, the good, and the accounting of the hard sat in its files, and said what it said, permanent and clear. And in the yard, a woman who had stopped running stood in the middle of everything she'd chosen and let herself feel how light it was finally to arrive. The following spring, a letter arrived from the Port Authority of Piraeus. It was addressed to Mara Theron. The name still slightly unfamiliar, still something she registered each time before she recognized it as herself. She opened it at the kitchen counter on a Wednesday morning, Theo at playgroup Nicholas, in his study on a call, the house in its mid-morning quiet. The letter was formal, official, the kind of bureaucratic language that courts and institutions used when they were communicating something that mattered and had decided the communication itself should reflect that. The harbor inspection conducted by Senior Inspector Georgos Calloway on November 14th, 4 years prior, had been formally reviewed and entered into the Port Authority's official record as a correctly executed and fully compliant inspection. His findings had been validated. His documentation, the documentation he'd filed that last afternoon in the hours before he died, had been formally acknowledged as the evidentiary foundation for subsequent regulatory action. He was credited by name in the record. She read the letter twice. Then she put it down on the counter and looked out the window at the yard. The raised beds were coming back into season. The tomatoes were starting again. The garden fence stood where it had always stood, the snail economy presumably resuming operations now that the weather had turned. Her father had been to a harbor on a November morning and done his job exactly right and filed his paperwork, and it was on the record now formally, permanently. The thing that had mattered had continued to matter. The work had counted. She folded the letter carefully and put it in the drawer where she kept the things she intended to keep. Then she went to the window and stood in the morning light for a moment. Then she went to Nicholas's study and opened the door without knocking, which she did now without thinking about it, the intimacy of the house having dissolved the question of permissions. He was still on the call. He looked up. She held up the letter. He registered her face and said into the phone with the precise brevity of a man who has decided something else takes priority. "I'll call you back," and put it down. She gave him the letter. He read it. When he looked up, his face was open. "It's official," she said. "Yes." She looked at the letter in his hand, at his face above it. "He would have thought the language was slightly overwrought," she said. "He had opinions about official prose." "So do I," Nicholas said. "I know." She almost smiled. Both of you. Opinions about language and cargo manifests. Very compatible. He looked at her. She took the letter back, folded it. I'm glad you didn't hide it, she said. One more time, the last time she needed to say it. I know you know. She put the letter in her pocket. I wanted to say it one more time. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and crossed to her and held her simply, the way you held someone when words were sufficient but a body was more. She pressed her face into his shoulder. He pressed his hand flat against her back. It's on the record, he said. Everything, all of it. The truth is on the record. Yes, she said, into his shoulder, muffled and completely certain. Yes. The spring morning moved around them unhurried. The call on his phone stayed unreturned. The yard outside was beginning its season. The house held them in its ordinary inhabited silence, and the letter in her pocket was heavy with the specific weight of things that have been waiting a long time to be true and have finally arrived. Nikolas held on. Mara held on. The light moved through the room, and the day continued ordinary and full and completely theirs.